that was annoying and a half. So much for all my great efforts, right? All right, so let's try to do this. We gotta think a little bit how we're gonna do this, but we'll make it work because we're smart. We're gonna figure this out. No, I won't back down. Gonna stand my ground. And I'll show you down to the gates of hell, but I won't back down. I won't back down, baby. There ain't no easy way out. Alright, and I will be here in a second. I'm just sharing links. No, I won't back down. No, I won't back down. Now, you knew I wasn't going to give up on you guys. They can try to shut me down, but my one friend says I'm like a mosquito. I just keep turning up, you know? It's one of those things in life. So, let me just save, let me see, how do I share this? No, don't add to queue. I don't need to add to queue. I understand that this is happening. Let's see. All right, started streaming less than 1 minute ago. That's sort of irony. How picture-in-picture is that? I'm watching me, watching me, watching me. Bam, bam, boom, 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 boom. Okay, so I shared the link over, and where was I? Okay, so we were talking about the problems out there. So people have no clue about how bad it actually is, by the way. But what is happening is that the whole damn thing is getting destabilized, and the problem is that different people are trying to figure out what sides they need to be on, where they need to go, and hopefully y'all will see this. I had to put it back on the camera because that's just using the computer. Actually, I shouldn't say the computer. My internet doesn't work right, and why my internet doesn't work right is one of those absolutely interesting things. But I am keeping up the other thing so that so I can read your questions here, and we'll see what ends up happening. And I don't know the answers to every question out there, so please keep that in mind. I'm going to do the best I can, and I'm going to watch your comments now in here because that's 1,000 times easier for me, I think. It is 1,000 times easier. Plus, I can actually type back to you. So forgive the mess. You're in the mad layer of the scientist. So this is absolutely one of the things, and I hear my echo because the wife is moving around. So yeah, you guys want more ABBA? That's absolutely. If you change your mind, I'm the first in line. Honey, I'm still free. Take a chance on me. I think ABBA's great, and you know the problem with ABBA is that Dancing Queen is way overplayed. People don't appreciate the genius of this. Swedish music in the 1970s, it literally was a different world. But I'm not going to sing that much. I mean, unless you guys really want me to. Then maybe I'll do it a little later, but I need a little more inspiration. Twice the courage, half the tone, notes, and space, right? But this is my relaxation. Anyway, where I wanted to go with this was we were talking about we were talking about all these issues that are out there, and what I'm telling you is it's a very unstable situation. I wish I knew all the words for that. It's a great song. What's his name? Roger, the guy who's from Supertramp. Absolutely wonderful song. What do you mean no singing? You sound like my wife. Why is it women never want me to sing? It's one of those things. Telegram, just go to t.me or telegram.org, I think it is, and you can sign up very easily. Thanks for mentioning that. The Telegram group is t.me/coronavirus central. It's a fun little group. Everyone there is very angry. There's radical leftist, radical rightist. Oh yeah, my voice is terrible, man. My voice was so high I could make dogs run away. It's literally cruelty to animals if I sing. But you guys aren't animals, you're human beings, so it's not cruelty to you. You just have to take it, you know? If you don't like it, take a knee, right? Just kidding. I don't, and I'll be honest with you, we have all this identity politics, all this stuff floating around. I've never understood it. I don't understand it. I don't understand the whole subservience thing. I won't pretend to understand the whole idea of reparations. To me, it's just ridiculous, and I don't have any idea whatsoever what people are doing other than virtue signaling in ways that make no sense. Everyone has interest, everyone has beliefs, and I have no problem with groups and interest in their beliefs, but this idea that you're going to get brownie points by going around acting like, I don't even know what this is. I really don't know, but I do think that we need a new radical center, and I will talk about that much more. And I'm going to try to figure it out over the next couple weeks. The good news for you guys is I've done a lot of groundwork, and I just have to decide, because if I go out there and say anything, I already know what the headline's going to be. White supremacist goes out there, blah, 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 blah. So we're going to have to go ahead and see one of these things. So let's see, I'm drinking on Ember Friday. Yeah, you know what? I just haven't been paying enough attention to what the calendar is. I certainly don't mean to do anything, how should I say, sacrilegious, but a lot of times I'm not paying as much attention as I probably should be to the calendar because it all sort of blurs together to me in this fast sort of going spiral. And I will tell you, it was very weird for me doing the podcast this morning. First time in a long time I've done it where I had to do all the work, and I will say there's 100. I should say, it takes about an extra hour when I have to do all the stuff for broadcasting on Apple and on Google and all that. And it just has a different flow to it. In today's show, I mean, I didn't know what I was going to do, but hopefully you appreciated the history lesson and talking about what did we cover? The French Revolution and the Bolshevik Revolution. And maybe I should talk about what happened in Serbia and Croatia and Bosnia a little more as we go through it. But with tonight's show, what I'm really trying to figure out, and really it's interactive, is where do we go from here? I can tell you about fights and uncertainty out there. I can tell you that it is not a safe situation for anyone. Good to see you, Firo. And hello to everyone who's here, by the way. Thank you for joining me, Tom Kaczynski, Coronavirus Central, your one-stop shop for a whole bunch of stories. And I continue to be amazed, by the way, of the talents and frankly, the diversity of our audience. You know, one of the things that really surprises me is the types of people who listen. And we've had some amazing conversations. Aloha, mahalo. See, I finally got it right. That we are having the opportunity to have a lot of conversations, and we should have conversations. And honestly, I'm having incredibly frank conversations with things, with people, where we are coming to a lot of things because we have to cut through a lot of crap. You know, the idea that everyone's going to go ahead and kneel down to people who were victims or whatever is a non-starter. I think we all understand that. And the question is, how do we avoid a really nasty war? And how do we do that for the people who want to? That's honestly becoming a little bit of a singular focus. And if the war has to come, so be it. But I don't want it to go that way if we can help it. And right now, we don't have good options on the table. I mean, it's one thing to talk, but I will tell you. And look, I've run into the, how should I say, the weed whacker that is the media, and they are awful. They are more rotten than you can possibly understand unless you've had the experience of it, and unfortunately I've had that dubious delight. But we have a growing audience. We're doing things pretty yet. Good to see you. And this is absolutely one of the problems we have out there. So there's a lot of different fights out there. We can talk about any of them. We'll cover whatever you guys like tonight. I don't have a deep monologue for you. Sorry you got kicked off Twitter. I know that happens a lot. Social justice being what it is. So we'll talk about whatever you guys find interesting, and what I'm going to try to do for at least next week is Monday, if the country hasn't burnt down, in which case we'll talk about what color the ashes are. I'll try to go connect some of the virus pieces. It's important. I just don't know all the details of it, and a lot of it's lost in the propaganda. And then we'll look at the ongoing unrest. And for those people around the world who listen, I apologize. It's not my fault. I didn't plan on America falling apart. I think it's really going to be a problem. So I'm going to go first through the comments from the first section where you guys were here before. Then we'll go through other ones. I want to thank you, John, for your kind gift, and also for mentioning what's happening in Buffalo, that the fact that the law enforcement is just moving away, and how do we feel about that? Is that safe? Is that good? I don't think it's going to work out well. I mean, anarchy generally doesn't. But I think we're in a phase where we might be in a much larger operation than people understand. And I know people don't believe it because the media didn't tell them so. But I understand also what the media doesn't tell you is usually the part of the story you need to know. If my broadcast is occasionally interesting, it's probably because I happen to stumble into things. And I will tell you, the rabbit holes are there to be found, but you get into a lot of trouble when you read them. So let's see what you all have to say, and I will comment and offer things. And if I'm looking the wrong way, it's because the computer is here and you are there, but I'm going to be able to do these things. So Arian says, did the U.S. Republic end today? And I don't know if it ended today. I think the Republic ended a long time ago, frankly. I mean, you had the deep state bureaucracy. You had thank you, Arian. I appreciate that. You had the National Security Act of 1947. I mean, if you ask me where things went wrong, I mean, if you really want my opinion, I think the 1910s routines were really bad. Federal Reserve, income tax, those sort of things, direct election of senators, not a fan of that. I think the National Security Act was pretty bad. 1947, you basically created the warfare state to continue. I'm not a big fan of the Great Society. I think it divided us more than it accomplished things. And LBJ was a prick and a murderer besides. You can look into the history of it if you really want to go. The guy was disgusting. He literally would make aides sit around while he was taking a dump on the toilet and record because he didn't like the smart people Kennedy had around, and he liked to be that sort of a jerk. I mean, this is the history you don't hear about, right? But it's out there if you want to find it. Actually, and people probably aren't a fan of him, but Roger Stone actually wrote a pretty interesting book about that. So, lots of things to talk about there. But do I think it's the end of it? Yeah, I think we've been a dead man walking for a while. I'm more interested in what follows next. One of the interesting things I was doing for a long time. I mean, you can even see what I used to work on. I mean, you can see behind it. That was the New Albion or flag. That's what I worked on. I mean, I know a lot of you guys aren't into separatism in politics like I am, but I did that actually, and we have the pines and lines, and it's an awesome flag. And we were doing some really interesting stuff up here, and in time, we kind of all knew the system wasn't going to hold, but I had no idea it would happen this way, this fast, and with this much intensity. So it's something we're going to have to deal with, and it's the reality of what's happening here, and what replaces it. I don't know, but if we want to have a seat at the table, we have to have a voice in the discussion. And within this community, I mean, look, we probably have a collection of smarter people than you would see almost anywhere else on the internet. Maybe we can figure some things out. And I would say that the constraints, my constraints for it, I think, are simple. Like I said, I think if you go ahead and you create a stronger Bill of Rights that we can all agree upon, that we agree to get rid of identity, that we abolish, groupisms, and then whoever fights for this is part of it. That's it. That's all it is to it. All that other shit that was from before goes away. Obviously it'll probably look a certain way. I mean, certain people are more interested than others. But nonetheless, if anyone comes in who doesn't look like they fit, but they go ahead and do the right things, I believe in merit. Let's work with that. That's absolutely a starting point. And that we have to kill democracy. And I know people don't want to hear kill democracy, but trust me, all we do is fight with one another for people who disappoint us on both sides. We really can do something a lot differently. And I suspect what you would end up with is something much better, much more stable. And we could see if, as a thought experiment, at least what those values would be. I mean, I know in my one book, in fact, I'll read it to you real fast, because why not? I'm here and you're a captive audience. So I actually worked out, this was in New Albion, the Atlantic Charter. I worked out my idea of what you might look at in a second bill, or an expanded Bill of Rights. So what did I do? Let's see, chapter 24. Not chapter 24, page 24. So I had the right to free speech, assembly, association, and worship. And if you guys have an issue with any of these, you call me out on it. Because this isn't necessarily all-inclusive. This was just what I came up with. And mind you, it's for a right-wing audience. But the idea of some things we can agree upon, that we can work together. Because right now, we have people fighting for what they're against. Does anyone out there know what they're fighting for? And I think if we can go ahead and speak to them and say, we're going to adhere to these principles, and you are not going to stop us, that's when people get empowered, when they know what they're standing for, instead of fighting against one another and fighting in a zero-sum game. You don't want to have those sorts of fights, because all you're going to end up doing is fighting one another. Every time you make a victim, you make an oppressor. And I don't want to play that game anymore. I'm tired of it. I mean, honestly, we've been hearing about the same people being victims for 60 years. Does anyone ever get tired of it? I am. And we've tried everything. We've tried throwing money at the problem. The only thing we haven't tried is there's two choices left, unity or separation. And to be honest, I'm fine with either. But we have to go ahead and be honest about it. This idea that you can pay your way out of a problem, that hasn't worked. And you're right, democracy and capitalism are horrific. I agree with you, Firo. All right. Spicy today. What the hell was I eating? All right, so free speech, assembly, association, and worship. You guys aren't going to give me a hard time about that. Self-defense, arms, and militia. And if any of you think having guns is not a good idea, you're starting to see now why self-defense is a good idea. You need it because governments lie to you, and so do other people. Don't trust them. Number 3, equal opportunity or consideration on a meritorious basis. What's this saying? If you're part of the people, that you're not going to be judged against in any way based on superficialities. And I think you got to have that. Number 4, privacy against search and seizure, warrants, and quartering. You know all those. I put number 3 into number 4. Again, self-incrimination. You should never have to admit your own guilt. I understand that. Number 6 is a new one, but I think it's a good one. Require a human accuser. We're living in machine times where you can have some video, something. Someone has to see you do something, because if not, everything can be faked. If you want to actually have a justice system where people don't go insane and a society for humans and by humans, you need to go there. And trust me, 10 years from now, it'll look real smart to have that in there. Number 7 was trial by jury, right to appeal, civil claims by judge, and speedy trial. You know all that. Now, this is where I came up with some new stuff, so you have to tell me what you think. Parental sovereignty and family integrity. I don't want the state taking your kids from you. In the absence of clear physical violence, and it would be a very high standard you'd have to have, the idea that the state or the school or any of these other people can tell you how to raise your kids, I move away from that. I believe in the restoration of the family, so I believe strongly with that. Number 9 is bodily sovereignty, health choice. I don't think people should be able to prick you with needles or make you take chips you don't want or vaccines. And I'm not saying you shouldn't do it, but I'm saying the choice should be yours. Your doctor should have to make it on persuasion. And the state shouldn't treat your body as a pincushion for whatever experiment thinks happens that week. You have rights. Number 10, school choice. That what I think we need to have is parents should decide what schools they are going to be able to go to and what school they don't want to go to. That's fine. I think it's better. I think having it outside the public system would be good. Give it to the churches, give it to private charter schools, whomever wants to do it, and pick where you want your kids to be raised. And then these are the two that I think if we did this way would actually really change the way the game works. Number 11 is no wage tax. If you earn money, keep your money. I think it's awesome. I don't think that you should have to pay wages. And to be very clear, wages are money paid to you in exchange for your labor. Income is gain or profit from capital and business. So there's a difference there. And even there have been cases, if you've ever seen Aaron Russo's Freedom to Fascism, what they've actually, or From Fascism to Freedom and Fascism. What ended up happening in that was that the IRS got sued several times because in 1955, the Supreme Court ruled wages were not income. And that is one of the things that was different. So number 12 is no homestead tax. I'm tired of the government basically treating you as renters on your land. You should own your land. And I would submit to you guys that what we could do to make a difference is we could refuse to remit taxes to this ghastly government. No more property taxes, no more income taxes. The government doesn't serve us, the people, so why the hell should we pay for something we do not want? And I suspect that might get some people thinking. Defend your communities, take this position, and say, hey, we're not going to go along with this anymore. And I think if you do that, you could have a very different world. And, you know, I went in there, and who knows, if you really want to read it, I mean, I have the Bill of Responsibilities, too, because I thought you needed responsibilities in this. These were the ones we came up with. We'll have to talk about them, because I know they're going to change a little bit. Defend the traditional nuclear and extended family, honoring men and women as indispensable partners. Preserve individual liberty as enumerated and beyond. Put people first above systems or ideology. Honor our history, heritage, and homeland. Serve as refuge for those against persecution. And for specifically, it says to serve for Christians and whites against persecution. But I'm willing to have a broader view of this in light of the way this is evolving. Remember, I came out of the far right wing. To ensure our children have a better future and that our future is for them, seek public consensus to forge common culture, discover truth through the use of reason, exercise reasonable stewardship over nature, provide for the public health, safety, and well-being, avoid entanglements, needless conflict, and debt usury. I would kill the central bank in about 5 seconds, by the way, and reappropriate its wealth back to the people, and keep secure the nation in faith and fidelity. So those are ideas and they're broad statements, but I would be willing to sit down, and I would imagine most people, left or right of center, could sit down on similar topics to that and figure out a way to come to something we can agree upon. Are there certain things they might want to have in the system? Sure. And can we agree on it? Sure. I suspect the deal is there to be made as long as you stop imposing things on people, as long as you kind of relocalize people. There's a lot of things that could be done. And that is what I actually did. That's what white supremacy looks like if you actually want to see based upon what the media would tell you. It looks a lot like something Patrick Henry would write on an evening with Thomas Jefferson down there in the Commonwealth of Virginia. To Virginia, R.I.P. Okay, so let's get back to your questions. But I use that as an example. There is common ground to be found, but we don't need to argue about who's right. We need to talk about what's right and come to a common consensus. And if we can get people to sit around the table, I might do this. I know the right people. maybe I'll get like 10, 12 people, women, men, different groups, whatever, that we would be able to go out there and we would be able to come to some common consensus. And I'll bring people ranging all along the political spectrum because I think that's important. I'll talk to the radical left, the radical right, different people, people of talent, skill, and awareness, and we'll have a really nasty, ugly, private conversation where we say things that you don't want to say in public about groups of people you don't want to offend, and we'll say, look, this is the real problem. What we did didn't solve it. What's the thing? And that's what we need to do because we have these problems in America that are systemic. And the other choice is we could either go full on Bolshevik, where we try to make everyone the same and you kill a bunch of people until you realize you can't. You could go Caesar for a while, but it doesn't look like we have that sort of person out there. And besides, being an empire caught up in yet more wars probably doesn't appeal to American. Or we can do something good. We can be friggin' Frodo and retake the Shire. And that's what I was doing up here in Maine. So I live up here, actually, you know? But it's not just here. You can do it in other places. You can do a lot of things like that. And I think it would be a lot of fun to do. And I think it would be really interesting. So let's go ahead, read some more information. So, good to see you, Needle. Glad, I hope things are going well in the Magnolia State. Isn't that what Alabama is, if I remember right? Stars fell in Alabama. That's what the license plates say, right? What happened today? Okay, I would like to know more about radical centrist philosophies. What could that look like? So the idea of radical centrism, as I envision it, and mind you, this is something I'm making up as I go, but here's how it would sound to me, is that what you do is you say that our position is that we are willing to change everything that doesn't work. That's the radical part. The centrist part is that we will take good ideas from whomever and whatever, whenever we like, without regard to ideology, and do so in a way where we recognize there isn't a one-size-fits-all solution. Sometimes the market makes sense, sometimes the state makes sense, and you use a fact-based way of approaching the question, using nature as a guide and awareness of good stewardship, where we will go ahead and try to find solutions that work for the whole of our people in loyalty and with the understanding we're going to screw it up sometimes. That's what radical centrism is. It's not saying that the state needs to dominate everything, which is the basic position of the left, to change people to be behaving better. And it doesn't say that the market deserves to dominate anything as the source of freedom, because as we know, what it does is it turns people into tools. What it is a different way of imagining the world where people can connect to one another, have honest conversations, and what it would mean in functionality is a government that does a hell of a lot less. The few things it does well, and it lets people make a lot of decisions. And how that would look, I am not advocating for any one structural approach. I'm a monarchist at heart, but we can have a conversation. What I would suggest, though, is voting systems end up killing you, so you probably want to have something where it's almost like a syndical in nature, where you have people who have talent to prove themselves. In the New Albion books, what I actually have argued, and good to see you, Blitz, one of the things that I've argued is that I've been making the case that what we should do is have people get elected to local office in their towns, get real life experience as an apprenticeship dealing with the issues of people, and then have them be promoted up through a system. And it gets a little complicated how I mix that with monarchy and different stuff. You can read the book if you want. It costs like $4. It's not expensive. But basically, you find ways to go up the ladder, and you bring people of talent and ability who have real experience, as opposed to people who lie to you well and who look good. That is one of the things that you have to do if you're going to have a new system. But it's going to also require people to work at the local level. And what I'm going to try to do, if I do this, which I haven't decided if I'm going to, is I will begin working locally. And I will reach out to people, and I will go out there and make a big stink about things. And because I'm me, that'll happen. And it might cost me my podcast being on iTunes, because they'll probably get mad at me. But I'll still be here, or I'll be somewhere, or I'll be at DLive, or I'll be in the Telegram group. And I don't care, you know. To me, it's not about who cancels me. I got to say what I think is true, because we're running out of time to go ahead and pussyfoot about things, so we're not going to do that. So hopefully, Julie, that answers your question, and it's an ongoing thing, but I think the real truth of it is it's a people-based philosophy that is pragmatic in orientation but willing to consider all alternatives if they make sense in defense of a common set of values and a common shared identity that has to be forged. And that is so important to me. I'm a culture guy. I write reams about culture, because whatever your truths are, it's like I said today on the show, whatever your story is determines where you're getting to. You know, if you start driving in a road, which direction you head determines your destination. Okay. Trump sent home the military from D.C. Also, he disarmed police, I think. I think D.C. is going to be overrun by protesters this week. I think it's going to be a mess. I think some people are going to get hurt, and we'll see. I would not be surprised to see major damage and a lot of issues. And to both sides, by the way, to be very clear. I think that there will be videos that are circulating of police getting hurt by rioters, and I think there will be videos circulating of protesters getting hurt by police. And this is what happens when you put people at violent, passionate level in one on top of each other. So I think that's definitely a major issue we're going to see. So glad to hear you in the garden, Alexa. Good to see you, Dominic. Dana's around. I'm sure she'll say hi. I hope you guys are okay, Softail, you and McSparron down there in Illinois. I certainly hear that people want to give you a hard time with the guns you're not allowed to have. A little civil disobedience wouldn't be the worst thing for people in Illinois. Joseph, good to see you. I hope all's well in the bluegrass state there, if I remember right. Let's see if my memory's good where you are. McSparron, thank you for that. And the examples to Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland's actually a really good example of this if you know the history of the IRA and some of the things involved with that. Julie, glad to hear you. Lisa, you're here. Can we all just, I think you meant to say agree that this American experiment has failed and we can go our separate ways, right, Joseph? That's my opinion, that we need to do something different. Here's what we need. Whether you think agree to fail is not important. What matters now is, can you come up with a workable solution? And I'll tell you, it's very hard because people are really invested. And I will tell you, if I spend more than 3 hours on Twitter, I start to regress to hating certain groups of people and certain things because I have to listen to things that are just, to my mind, asinine. Oh, you brought me my tea. Thank you. Okay. Oh, I can't grab that. I'll never be able to grab that. Just sit on the floor. Thank you, dear. Do you want to say hi to everyone? They can hear you. They can't see you.
Okay.
Okay. Everyone say hi to Dana. She's here. Okay, so let's see. Tom, for those of us in the city, which side do we pick to be safe? I'd rather choose a third way, but I'm not sure that's safe either. Well, Sarah, I would say that if you're in the city, be scarce. If you can't get out, when in Rome, look like a Roman. I think that's what you have to do, but I wouldn't overcommit to it, and I wouldn't do anything more than you have to do. So, thanks for getting my book, McSparron. I appreciate that. I'm ready for Chocolate City s'mores. I know what you meant by that, Brian. Dan, good to see you out in Texas. Let's see. Glad you guys are hearing me. Let's see. Softail writes, I'm horribly concerned about all the tear gas being deployed. It makes you cough deeply and out of control. One person with COVID, violently coughing, spitting. This is bad. I mean, I guess it's good that people are wearing masks from a virology perspective. But I do think a lot of people are really going to get sick. And, it was interesting. What's his name? Levine, who is the head. Mark Levine's his name. The guy who's the head of New York City Council said, don't blame people getting sick from COVID on protests. Blame it on white privilege or something. I mean, I hate to say it's the most ridiculous thing I ever heard. Blame it on people going ahead and circulating at a time when it's not safe. And, people got whiplash from how quickly they've changed their view about what this thing is. So either the media is lying to you one way or another. And I would submit to you, considering that the media didn't seem to really give a damn about the suffering of black people because it didn't move the needle before, they're probably doing this because it's part of A, ratings, B, a larger thing out there, and C, their own agendas that you don't know. So I don't think that they legitimately care because, let's be honest, before George Floyd, all these things were out there to care about. And Tucker went on there, and you may love him or you may hate him, but Tucker had a hell of a segment where he basically showed in America the genocide of white crime, white cops attacking black, unarmed victims. There were 10 people of that. 5 of them fought back, and 5 who didn't, who had more complicated situations. 2 of the officers went to jail, and there were other situations. So in a country of 300-some million people, there were less than 10 incidents that happened, and there were much more incidents that happened in other directions. He went through them one by one, laying out the cases. That's not a systemic problem. That is a largely functional criminal justice system with respect to this, and all that information's out there. So, but I'm sort of getting lost from your question, Softail. Yeah, I agree with you that the idea that people are spreading a whole lot is going to cause a lot of issues. And I'll tell you, I never seen so many license plates. I saw Kansas plate in Maine. What's someone from Kansas doing up here? Did they get lost? Did they get caught in the tornado where Toto took them to the other side? I don't know. Okay. Samsung, good to see you. Julie, glad you're here. Joseph, Breadbox, Jenny, Experin, Julie, different Julie. Benny, Sean, glad to see you here. Toggle Trump sending away the army. We'll talk about that. And Alexa, thank you for asking me to continue. Look, I just get demoralized in the fact that a lot of people go ahead and attack. And you guys don't get to see the back end of it. My life, it's not really your fault or anything. I'm not blaming you. I'm just saying for years I've been fighting political wars and I'm tired. But you know what? This is the big one. It's time to show up, go big or go home, and that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna go ahead and find a way to be heard, put our voice out there, and if nothing else, we're helping keep a lot of people safe, which is pretty good. I mean, theoretically, if I'm smart, I should just be hanging out here and keep my damn mouth shut. But you know me, I'm a big mouth. My one buddy calls me the Slavic savage. It's kind of crazy how things go, but I just like to say the truth, man. I just like to say what I see out there. And, if I piss people off, honestly, when I go ahead and piss people off, I usually just want to go ahead and take shots at them because that's my political nature. I'm not used to having to be nice to my audience. It's usually political actors attacking me. And I usually say awful, rotten things about them that really make them cry. Lord forgive me. But that's the nature of the theatrics of it. All right, let's see what else we got here. Let's see, and thank you, Dana, for sharing this. Trump just tweeted about the mayor of D.C., called him totally incompetent, right on the money as usual. The color revolution thing Brian asked about, this definitely is the sort of thing that looks like a color revolution, where I can't imagine how much money is being rolled into this, these what do you call it, these bond funds. And I still want to know I want to ask this question, and I got some leftists in here. You guys tell me, do you ever feel uncomfortable that and I'm not saying that for the Antifa types, do you ever feel uncomfortable that the people who you claim are ruining the system are the same people bankrolling you? Do you ever think there's any sort of a discontinuity there, that they might be using you for some untoward ends? I mean, I've always wondered that, because it seems like it's really obvious and it should be really suspect. And once upon a time, people were more critical thinkers. But who knows? We live in a different world. I don't know. I've always wondered that. And I mean, Lord knows, getting a patron, that's something that's friggin' impossible, because I mean, that's how it is. Money's hard to come by, man, and money's what makes this stuff flow around. And the people who have tons of it go ahead and put these things into it. So, anyways, all right. So we're now in the new chat. So let me just read your comments here. Alexa, good to see you. Okay, so I'll say who I didn't say. So Margot, good to see you. Shigam, glad you're here. Yeah, the problem, I actually have run third-party ones before. It's a nightmare, and the system is rigged where it's really expensive to do it, and it's really hard. It's really difficult. Am I still using Wi-Fi? Unfortunately, yeah, I am, and I'm upstairs because it's way more comfy for me. But this works a lot better here. It's a bourbon and ginger ale night. Big anxiety. Good to see you, Chris, by the way. Should I sing the logical song? When I was young, I thought that life was so magical. A miracle. I have to remember how it all goes. Great song, though. I like Breakfast in America, too, by the way. Great album, actually. Let's see. How do I sign up for Telegram? I answered that, and I do sing higher. I can do the falsetto, but you can't always get what you want, actually. And thank you, John, for the kind of things I'm sharing here. I appreciate that. Steve, good to see you here. What is the significance of Trump's cucking to Esper today? Is Trump's reign over? I think Trump was trying to get out of Dodge. I think D.C. is a very unfriendly place for him, and it wouldn't surprise me if he retreats somewhere better this weekend. He came up to rural Maine, which I thought was really a curious thing, but I would not be surprised from what I've heard. Given who supports who and what I've seen before, don't be surprised if President Trump doesn't end up at Fort Bragg, because I think that his best bet is going to SOCOM and going that way. I don't know. Other options would be, plus you're not far from Camp Lejeune there. You're not far from Norfolk. And I guess it depends what different branches are shaking out. But if it was me and I had to pick and I was trying to be in close with the military, I think going maybe down to North South Carolina is a good choice. I think Fort Hood over in Texas is another choice that would be worth looking at potentially. Or Camp, well, I wouldn't go to California, but otherwise I would say Camp Pendleton. But given the fact, what I've heard is the Marines heavily support Trump, and that Mattis was brought in specifically to try to mitigate that concern. So that if I was Trump and I wanted to firm that up, being at the intersection of special operations and the Marine Corps would be maybe not a terrible place to be. I don't know if he owns any property there near the Outer Banks or the Carolina coast, but if I had to pick where to be, if I was the president, maybe that would not be a terrible place as things go down. And especially, I'd say just across the border in South Carolina, No, actually, let me answer Samsung's question because it's interesting to me. Do I think Bank of America's donation, which supposedly was $1 billion to Black Lives Matter, was a form of insurance? No, I think actually it's an investment in insurance fraud, if you want to think of it that way. They're trying to burn the whole thing down. And remember, for banks, it doesn't matter. They can get more money anytime. They get it for free. You know that. And so for them, they can put as much money as they want out there. The banks are enabling these protests. Why? Because they want to destroy cities. What does it do? It allows the debt refinance. There's a lot of different reasons why they might do it. And there's some that are speculative and some that are obvious. So we'll have to take a look at that. But I do think that Trump not removing Esper is yet another bad sign that this is a weak administration. Unless they have another play and they want to do it from outside D.C. Let's see what happens this week. But I will say, if we go through another weekend of violence and Trump doesn't do very much, then ultimately the government has a closing window to go ahead and reassert control. Some of you will think that's a great idea. Some of you will think that's a terrible idea. In reality, for the stability of the country, it's probably a necessary idea if we're going to continue forward with the system we had before, which may or may not be a good thing, but these are the things to keep an eye on. So anyway, John was writing, my good friend McLean, who's having a PBR, by the way, Pabst Blue Ribbon, awesome choice. Buffalo Police Emergency Response Team all resigned, 57 officers, huge deal for Western New York. Yeah, I think that's a place you want to keep an eye on this weekend. I think Buffalo is a place where you could have a lot of problems, kind of a blue-collar, middle-class city inside a deeply blue state that has a lot of red people there. By red, I mean Republican, not Native American. But although there are a lot of Native Americans near the Seneca tribe and whatnot, but ultimately, not to be offensive, just the words that are the way there. Those are things we should keep an eye on. I mean, Louisville's always a chance for things. I think Washington's going to be a problem. And I'm going to watch. Who knows? Maybe depending on what I feel like tonight, maybe I'll even do a little live streaming. Maybe I'll throw on the TV and see if we can't find something. And we'll see what awful things are happening. It used to be on YouTube you could find good information. At this point, you almost have to go on DLive because they've censored all sorts of things, that are out there. Jenny, good to see you. You guys should hear when I do real proper drunk history. It's one of those things that we really are going to. Who knows, man? Oh, the stories I could tell. It'd be like a Dr. Seuss novel, And I know I said novel when he writes cartoons, right? The things you could tell. Oh, well, oh, well. I agree, Joseph. I'm not kneeling except for my Lord and Savior Eber. So let's see. Made me inhale CS in the mean green machine. That's funny. Get back on. Had many accounts. Let's see. Rumors are that Aryan Shrugged asked me. Rumors that rural folks in Indiana will be targeted by Antifa this weekend. True. There's a lot of rumors floating around about left-wing provocateurs going out into farm country to cause problems. I don't know that they're going to do that. I think they're talking a big game. But the truth is, especially if you have stand your ground in castle doctrine states, you're liable to get shot. I mean, people are asking a lot of questions, and I've talked to a lot of people who are, out there in these sort of situations, and they are ready for these sort of issues. And I would submit that that would be a very poor decision, but it might happen. We'll see if it happens, and we'll see if people get targeted, and we'll see what the response is. And I will tell you, if the law enforcement keeps having unequal responses, and this is just the truth, basically, the people who would oppose the ongoing riots are afraid to death of getting picked up by the FBI. Something has to be done about that. Otherwise, this will become a full-on revolution backed by the full power of the federal government. And it's interesting that the government's being used to destroy the government, but that's how these things happen. And it's not all that together uncommon because you have a lot of unelected people heavily involved in this. The police state has never been in the interest of the people, neither the CIA or the FBI. I mean, J. Edgar Hoover wasn't a good guy, It's a freak. All right, let's see what else we got here. The media does suck, Julie. I agree, and I ain't kneeling for anybody here. Let's see. Enjoyed the podcast this morning. Write some experience. Lots of cultural parallels with Scotland, Northern Ireland history too, as well as the French. C'est bon. I got your book from Amazon, reading it this weekend. I think that'll be good. And I will get you one of the flags, John. Absolutely. I still have like 90 New Albion flags. So who knows? The problem is I'm going to send one of them out to someone, and I'm going to find it flying at some event, and then I'm going to have some huge fight. But you know what? That's fine. I'm getting ready. All I need is a bodyguard. I think if I had that, I'd be in good shape. And I know the right guy for that too. He's brilliant. See if I can talk him into it. The Manerbund with Ahab and Nam had a fantastic cast. That's interesting. I didn't have a chance to listen to that one. Separatism will work. Interesting. I agree with that. Margot says, I'm tired of all the victim oppressor stuff. I want separation. I believe it's possible. Margot, I am thinking the same way you are. This thing is fucked, and we need to go ahead and figure out a different way. We could have something like a Swiss militia-based forces, Brian. I think that's true. I actually did a lot of thought about that, and it's in one of my books. And one day, actually, I will take a day next week, maybe Wednesday, because Wednesdays usually are a bit slower, and we'll go through some of the details of thoughts of how. And I invite you to bring your ideas too, by the way, of things we could do better and differently. And start from the position we are in here, where we are disconnected individuals, and let's figure out how to make something actually work and bring your best ideas to the table. We can absolutely do that. What about the right of an ethnic group to maintain its representation in the state? So the thing is, we're all going to end up fighting over this. Nations need to have unity that are going to work together, and I think that's important. Now, I will be very clear that I have, in when I wrote the New Albion Constitution, I did not put any tests in terms of identification of who can be involved. But in reality, I also understood that it was going to end up being something that was just by nature majority white, only because the people who are out there revolting, who are maddest, are non-whites. I mean, there are a lot of white people, but ultimately, I know the voting patterns, and they're overwhelmingly amongst minorities who support things like the protests, the riots, and all those things. So we probably, if this ends up going to different sides and people who want to break away on a certain basis, will probably look a certain way, which will probably solve certain problems. Although there will be people who fit outside that, like your Candace Owens and Michelle Malkins of the world. And I have no problem with people like that, and I have no problem with ethical people who look at this differently. I do think that you have to be very smart about immigration, and I would not make the ridiculous mistake America made of bringing in basically whoever other countries didn't want. You have to have an idea of what you're trying to do and bring in people who think like you do, and you don't want to have a system where your schools teach that everyone is bad and everything is awful. You need to build a positive sense of self-identity for everyone who exists within your nation. And I realize that living in America in this broken society, we forget that things can be healthier in other ways, but we see the inclusion to some extent of things. I mean, look, I'm a Slav. That I couldn't have been white 100 years ago, and I understand that part of it. And I will tell you, when you watch the Latinos fighting outside Chicago, there's a lot of white people who are really happy about what they're doing to keep them safe, as opposed to what's happening for other groups. And in a lot of ways, I hate to say it, a lot of these problems go back to manipulations that happen of the black community, because a lot of times they get bribed, provoked, tricked into acting against their interests, and I don't think they're going to end up getting anything better out of this. In fact, they're just going to end up pissing a lot of people off. And of course, it's their right to protest. It's absolutely something I support, but I don't think blacks are going to come out of this any better. And I feel bad for them because they get manipulated a lot. And I know that they do certain things. I know the statistics. You don't need to convince me. But look, every people I want to see succeed. That's it. And if we have to do it in separation, well, maybe that's the way to deal with it. Okay. And that might be what people want. I think that's absolutely, I think it's fine. It's a conversation. We should have a conversation about it. And we should have a conversation where we talk about how group identities are going to be reconciled. And everyone has a seat at that table, but including whites. Whites have interests that don't fit with other groups, and we should articulate them. Otherwise, we're just going to fight later, and we're not going to go ahead and pay for everyone to do everything and say we hate ourselves. That's ridiculous. No group would do that. All right, civil trial by judge might end some of the stupid judgments. It might. We could talk about the judicial system. I wrote chapters on that, but I don't want to go into it. The family is the center of the nation. The family is more than the center of the nation. The family is the center of civilization. The family is the smallest reproducing social unit, men and women having children together. Without that, you have no society. You just have a state that's creating new subjects. And you really need to go ahead and do that. I think it's so important. And look, for people who don't choose that sort of relationship, I'm not here to persecute you. But on the other hand, the state has to invest in what creates its perpetuity. My own belief. Democracy is two wolves and a sheep voting for what's for dinner. Ain't that the truth? No wage tax. Let's see. Speaking as one thoughtful, open-minded lefty, writes Julie, I can agree with or concede to all of those. Not extreme at all. Doable. And see, I think that's what it is. Good philosophies. And maybe, Julie, as we go through, you'll have something that you want to include, and we can talk about it. In my planning for this, I actually went ahead and I made the argument that what we needed to do was, we should have healthcare coverage. We should have something where we're environmentally responsible. I think that is one of those things that really people should be able to consider. And I think, if we're going to be 100% honest, let's cut the shit. Let's go right past it. The reason Americans hate welfare is because they have the perception it goes to other groups and not their group. And they have the idea that certain people rob the system, people don't. The reason why, and I'll be blunt, the reason why white people don't have a problem with corporate welfare, but do have a problem with social welfare, is they have the idea that goes to people in inner city, urban, that is to say, colored communities that go ahead and cheat the system, and then they don't look at corporations the same way. And that's an example of systemic bias. I admit that. That's absolutely out there. Conversely, you have a whole society that tells blacks everything they do is never their fault. They're never responsible. They're supposed to go ahead and get support, and they're supposed to be cared for cradle to grave, which does them no justice. It doesn't help them. You want no peace, no justice? Have self-sovereignty. And I say this with respect. In the 1950s, before the drug things, before the breakdown of the family, before the crime, all that stuff, black families were doing better and their incomes were rising. I mean, black communities might not have been the same as white communities, but there were a ton of them that were growing in a very smart way. So can it be done? Yeah. But at this point where everyone's been radicalized, and let's be honest, the media teaches people to hate each other. The schools teach people to hate each other. They constantly go for all these different things and all the issues that are out there, and they present us to be at one another's heads. You know, it wasn't always that way. I mean, if you even want to look, you look at the history of this. George Lincoln Rockwell, the head of the American Nazi Party, used to hang out with Malcolm X. And, you know, people would have conversations about identity that were incredibly frank, and if you watch them, really interesting. And they were honest and they were sincere, but then we came into this universalism where we had to pretend we were different people to get along. I don't want people to pretend to be what they aren't. It doesn't work, because eventually the stress breaks you down. And for too long, we've been trying to fit square pegs in round holes. We can't do that anymore. So what are we going to have to do? We're going to have to do something different, and that means we have to start with honesty. But I think that we need to go ahead and say, what are your interests? What can we work on together? And that's what I've been saying for a long time, and I've offered to do that for years. And I speak honestly to the interest of the silent majority. That's what I do. I've done that for years, and I get a lot of support from them. How do you think I've made it? A lot of people have gone behind me and be like, thank you, Tom, for saying the thing that I want to say but can't because I'd lose my job. I already paid the price. I mean, they can't hurt me. I'm like that Joanna chicken in the Hunger Games. They already took away everything I care about. I'm punished Tom. You know, that's what it is. I can't wait for the meme to come, you know? Anyway. Let's read what else you guys got. Alright, let's see. But I did, you know, you asked about ethnic representation area, and I'm going to talk about that. I think that there is a value to what our references are, and I think that I talked about this. John and a couple others who've really read my books are familiar with this. I had this concept called the kindred, and what it meant was that we would have the opportunity to be part of cultural groups based on our heritage. And it's partially based on heritage, and it's partly based on what you choose to be in, but that we can add depth, and you can have a degree of pluralism if you have interculturalism. You can have the idea that you have different groups, but you have to let those groups pick what they want for themselves and not fight one another all the time and say, you have to believe like I believe, or that you're better, or this is that. They're just different. And you know, some of these differences are non-trivial. I mean, people who had traits in Scandinavia were different than those in Sicily because they live in, one people live with olives and the other people live with reindeer. You know, it's just the way of the world. And I think we need to be honest about that. And there's place for that. We can have that. And I think people who are honest about their own sense of worth can better relate to others. And you can find peace and tranquility that way, whether it be in separation or in union. And I've often thought with the United States, it might look something better like the old Confederation of, you know, the Rhine, or I should say the Holy Roman Empire, because that came afterwards, that they did in Germany and northern Italy, where you can have different states go different ways. I mean, America used to be that way. It was 50 states. If you look at the United States before the Civil War, they said the United States are. So, you know, these things changed. Let's see. The phrase white supremacy is scary for me to hear. Yeah, it's a total canard, by the way. It's basically what you've been taught is white supremacy. It's just basically white guys who are annoyed they have to get in this. They mostly want to be left alone and not be blamed for everything on mankind. They're like, what sort of supremacy is there? I was busy playing my video games. You're making me put down my Pop-Tarts for this? You know, and there is an ironic sense of humor about it. There's a couple guys out there who are kind of rough around the edges. But for the most part, it's a very small, close-knit community that really doesn't do very much. And they can't because, honestly, half the people in it are feds. They're just going ahead and collecting their pensions because the FBI is always looking to find... And I will tell you, this is a true story. FBI loves to look for people who have mental retardation and trick them into doing awful things to advance narratives. You want to know why they have all these cases go out there with kids doing horrible things. You ever notice how it's kids who are on the edge, 16, 17, 18 years old, you know, maybe 19, 20, who are talked into it? A lot of times it's like they were saying when this started. You have 3 people, 2 of them are law enforcement trying to entrap the one other person, which is why sane people don't talk themselves into it. I mean, we try to do things. things. And, ultimately, even a march was represented as a terrorist attack, representing your First Amendment rights. That literally has been one of the problems out there. And that's why the right isn't out there. A lot of us have gone and talked to a lot of people on the center right, and they go ahead and they tell them the truth, which is that you're not allowed to protest. If I imagine that we got together as a mob of 50 people, whatever our different identities are, and we tore shit up, we would be national news. And if we said, well, we were doing it for the injustice of this, they would say, no, you're not. You're criminal terrorists. And they would literally, the FBI would go take you to Guantanamo and waterboard you. This is the country we live in. And, you got to realize where the inequities exist, but they don't allow certain ideas to go forward. So, you actually were trained as a UC by the local Grand Wizard. That's interesting, man. I didn't. Since you mentioned the Klan, there aren't too many of those guys around anymore. There's a couple in the background. I'm aware of that, but it really isn't like it used to be a big organization. By the way, it's really not at this point. It's a shadow of its own former self. And even the history of the Klan, people don't know that the history of the Klan was they were considered heroes in Tennessee because when the Yankees came in after the war and they basically took all the property from the people who were there, General Forrest actually was leading the Confederate soldiers to fight to take that back because they were having a bunch of Southerners getting attacked by that. And I'm not saying that they were right. I'm not supporting lynchings or anything horrible like that. But I'm saying there's a complex history that was 100 years old down there that told a very different narrative. And a lot of times what you find is that the story you hear is not the same thing. You hear the story that this group good, this group bad. The truth is you hear Hitler's the worst person on earth, right? But Stalin killed at least 3 times as many people, and you don't hear a peep about him. So you have to realize that all these narratives are scripted, and I'm not here to carry water for anyone. If you guys want to go ahead and talk about, different issues in history, we can do that. Mind you, I will get myself in a lot of trouble if I do that. As a general rule, I don't talk about World War II very much, because when you talk about World War II, there's a whole bunch of mythology that's involved with that, and it isn't really as simple as that. So that is absolutely... this is a great question, Sharon. How am I going to have healthcare if there's no property or income tax? Great question. There's going to be a sales tax because that works on consumption, which is the fairest way to do it. And there will be tariffs so that goods going out of the country will be there. And there will be tourist fees that will be used because we will have one of the best healthcare systems in the world. And as it turns out, without a giant military, you can afford a lot of things. And we wouldn't need a giant military. We would just simply have a deterrent. And we actually would plan. And when I did it, it was sculpted for New England, actually. And the idea was that we wanted to become a hydro superpower, where in fact we would go ahead and put tidal generators on the Bay of Fundy, where we could go ahead and basically sell all the electricity to Boston and New York for pennies on the dollar. And just like Alaska gives an oil check to all of its residents, we could give not just a UBI check, but the idea of giving real money to our people as part of a common identity that would go ahead and support us. So there's a lot of different ways you can do it, but it's a great question, and believe me, finance is tricky. I was a town manager. Before that, I was a purchasing director. I know a lot about how to play in that world. I was an auditor, too. I've done a lot of things that within this sort of issue. And so there are ways you can do it, and a lot of it has to do with getting rid of stupid spending. You want to be hockey commissioner? Well, you know what's funny? One day I got kind of bored and I was making a fake hockey league of teams between the Maritime provinces and northern New England. I created a team for Burlington, for Portland. I don't think the Canadiens would find it top tier flight, but what can you do? Well, it had a certain je ne sais quoi, What do we got here? Respectfully, we disagree about the protests. They have turned peaceful and under the surface they're about more than race. Please view the protests under the lens of disdain for the current system. Brett Pops, let me say this to you. I think most of the people who are out there protesting are probably not there with untoward intentions. I think a number of them are paid, but probably not the majority. I think most people are probably out there just doing it because we came out of a pandemic. They want to say something. And I'm sure they have genuine beliefs. And look, I have said, and I've said it on the record from the very first moment, you can quote me, I've never said otherwise publicly or privately. What happened to George Floyd was an aberration, an abortion. It needed to be stopped. And I'm not here to support police brutality. I've had to deal with police acting like dicks. It's not fun. I've been on that side of it. So I'm not here to go carry water for them. But I would say that ultimately, if we're going to destroy the system, that's fine. But the thing about it is, if you have disdain for the current system, and I believe you do, you're here every show, ultimately, what is the disdain placed at? Is it placed at abstract entities that are put in front of you by people giving you a lot of money and saying, here's the bad guy? Or is it for the real system as it is? And the understanding that if you're going to get there without having a fight, that will functionally end up being a race war, that you're going to need people who can come together for commonalities. And that's what we're looking for. We're just looking for commonalities, and that's what this is about. I assume that things are done in good faith by people, unless they give me reason to believe otherwise. I assume the leftists who are in my audience are genuine people who care about others, who are trying to do the right thing. I don't think they're right about how they want to go about certain things, but that's okay. They think I'm an obnoxious hillbilly prick sometimes, and that's true. I can be, and that sometimes you need sometimes you need some salt, and sometimes you need some sugar. And I've come to realize that sometimes I need to modulate what I'm doing so I can fit what they're doing, and sometimes people need someone to be a little bit of a bastard like I can do. And that's sort of how this all works between us. And I think that's the balance that needs to be right if we can agree on core principles. And look, I can agree upon the core principle that people should be treated according to merit. And I think if we can work from that, we can get to a lot of other places. But that requires a concession, which is that no more complaining. No more excuses, no more whining, no more reparations, none of that other bullshit that we've been hearing about for years, and that people have to follow the law, because the reality is the race crime statistics are out there from the FBI, and we need to have people who are acting civil in civil society in every group, and I'll just leave it at that. I mean, I think people understand the subtext, and I do think that there is more than race, but I think some of the stuff that's out there, I don't know if I agree with it, and I do know too many people want to blame people like me, and if you're going to blame me, that's fine, you have the right to do that, but don't be surprised when I end up playing the role of the bad guy. I have no problem playing the villain in this story. Frankly, I'd be quite good at it. You know, I'll be playing, and I've thought about it. I've been asked to do it. And we'll see. We'll see how it all shakes out, and that's going to be interesting. And I may not have a choice. And one of those things, that's interesting about this is that, this events may all overtake us, and in the same way that Billy Yank and Johnny Reb ended up on the other side of the line, we may do so at some point. I might be fighting some of you guys, and I wouldn't be very happy about it, but hey, that's life, and things like that happen, and it's one of the crazy things about where we are in time. But while it isn't that way, let's try to do something to make it that way, and I'm glad. Of course, you could be a henchman, Joseph. We'd have lots of them. We'll go and raid Sharon up in Canada, but I'm just kidding. Um, no, but it's absolutely true. I want to go ahead and, be able to work with everybody. But, yeah, I tell you the story, and I tell you the way it really is, and I save a lot of time. Because ultimately, let me tell you something, politicians, media, they're all the same thing. We're bards. We tell you stories. We're like a minstrel. Stay out of Canada. I've been told that, but I don't know if I'm going to go for that. People are very polite up there, but I don't know if there's enough sandpaper. We'll see. But I don't know if you're going to have a choice either, because I tell you the truth, what I was reading earlier today, and I'm not kidding, is I hear that there might be militaries on the march, and you know what, some of these you might be facing, I'm not even joking, a Chinese and or Russian invasion into Canada, in which case then we're going to be on the same side, and that would be really interesting. I have much love for the Canadians. People, don't believe me. I love going up, but I mean more Atlantic Canada. I'm not so good with Central Canada. It's okay. Nothing against them. It's just the way it is. I'm not really a Midwesterner either. When I go to Wisconsin, actually, I'll tell you a funny story. You guys like my ridiculous stories. When I went to Wisconsin, I literally went into this pancake place in rural Wisconsin. And one of the things you realize if you travel is that people move at different speeds of life. For instance, my mother was from New York, so I talk 1,000,000 miles a minute. But people in other areas talk slower. Mainers talk more like this. When you go to Wisconsin, this is the way people talk at this speed, and they go really slowly. It's like watching Bob Evans at 1/4 speed. It is really interesting. So I'm having a little fun, and my family's from Wisconsin. I was born in Milwaukee. But one of the things that's interesting to me is just how different people are in the way they communicate, the way they act. So it has been really. I don't want to invade. Look, I'm not there to invade. I go to Nova Scotia to go hang out at Cape Breton. Okay, that's what I do. But we'll see. I'm not here to threaten Canadians. I'm really not. So we'll see what happens. But I will say, if you guys get invaded, we're so adding you in. So just be warned. Be aware of that. It's gonna happen. And honestly, it'll be great. It'll be fine. You'll love it. You'll be able to bitch just as much as you did before and say that it's a horrible idea. It'll be fine. You'll keep your national identity, and you can still talk about how much the War of 1812 you kicked their asses in certain battles, which is true, by the way. That's actually absolutely true. But then again, you had all of Britain behind you. Not exactly fair. But hey, Battle of New Orleans was pretty badass too. Okay, good. I'm glad you're not threatened. Don't be threatened. I'm not threatening anyone. I love Canadians, and Dana will say, I've always said I wouldn't mind getting in like a little passport and a secret hideaway in Newfoundland. Because why not, right? You can go eat salt cod, bacala. Dana says she'll never eat it. All right. I admit I don't believe the protests are largely driven by another actor. Not to say they aren't there, but the people are pissed. Joseph, I agree with you, man. People are pissed. And the people who are out there are legitimate. But the problem is I really believe the protests are serving as cover for something else. That's my own thought. Let's see. 5G books in yet? If so, thoughts. I have a 5G book. I got to read this. Who knows? It's not very interesting. Oh, no, I know you'd go Democrat from shore to shore, except I don't think Alberta would. I think Alberta would vote Republican, and I think Quebec would still vote for the Bloc Québécois. That's just my own perspective on it, but we'll see. I mean, I don't know. I understand the Canadians would change politics in certain ways, and honestly, remember, I don't believe the Republic's going to last, so this would be something very different for both of us. And I know the history of all that. I actually read a lot of things. I mean, I have a whole bookshelf over there with books on Canada, so I know a lot more than you would think, from your average American, because I just find it fascinating. It's almost a historical accident, and I know that will sound offensive, but it's really one of those weird things that existed. Canada's got kind of a fascinating and bizarre history, but that's another day. No Albertans would vote Democrat. I agree with that. Alberta would probably want to join part of Montana, so... okay, so anyways, we're not getting into Canada today. We're gonna be nice. I'm just here to be friendly. But things start breaking apart in different ways. I wouldn't mind joining up with Quebec because I like speaking French. Okay, let's see. When do I think the protesting will stop? It's a great question, Melody. I think if we really have a very rough outbreak of COVID, I think we might see that in 2 or 3 weeks. But I honestly don't think they're going to stop if there's nothing to stop them. I mean, they really feel like they got a flow of power. And, I'll use an example for you. This is a good example. Some of you will be familiar with the Yellow Vests movement in France. And that thing went on for a whole year. The media just stopped reporting on it. But I think that that's one of the things that will continue. So thank you for asking me that, Melody. Greg says, hey, Tom, checking in from London. Keep up the great work. I hope all's well there across the pond, bro. I hope it's going good. Let's see, Murray, Butterworth, Bailey, and Dana. Absolutely. My good friend Murray's always around. So, thank you to everyone saying hi to Dana. Let's see. I agree the protests, and I believe the protests are largely organic. We need to focus on protesting the broken system, not protesting political views. I agree, and that's hard, man. It's an election year. God, I'm sad this happened in an election year. GS, good to see you. Glad you're here this evening. So, Black Lives Matter in hotels in Caledonia tonight already staging. Isn't Caledonia southwest of the city, if I remember right, down on, was it down 90 when you're heading down towards Erie? I'm trying to remember because it's been a while since I've been over to Buffalo. So I have to visit there again. I was actually going to go ahead. Well, you know what's interesting, Sharon, that actually, if you connected New England with the Northeast, you'd end up with something that probably would be liberal in a lot of ways. It would probably be liberal on social policy, it would be liberal on environment, and there would be broad agreement about a lot of things that you guys really get worked up about. And honestly, a lot of Americans would be happy for the renewed focus on environmentalism. That's big in New England specifically, not in other places. All right. Jenny says, the Texas Medical Center sees uptick in COVID patients in ICUs, warns if trends continues, capacity could be exceeded in 2 weeks. Expect it, and let's see who they blame for this one, because it's pretty obvious, right? But I hope everything proves okay in Houston. Super spreaders in Western New York, absolutely. I am in Munchkin land. Let's see, what crisis will hit us next month? Oh, that's a question. Maybe, I don't know. I mean, remember, China's still agitating. Ultimately, we could see that become a major issue as well. And I don't know, could a war break out? That's an opportunity. Maybe like a big earthquake. Let's see if this is going to be, apocalyptic year, we should have a volcano in Yellowstone. So I don't know what's going to happen. But I do think, in fact, these protest riots, whatever, will continue. And we will end up seeing what happens. So I don't know. And I will say, and I want to be very clear for Breadbox and for the people who are listening, I do distinguish between the protests and the riots. I know people don't. I understand there's a difference. And I have a lot of leftist friends. I went went to friggin' Swarthmore, okay? Once upon a time, long, long ago, in a life we will not talk about, I called myself a socialist. I know where y'all are coming from, and I know I got a little bit hard. I'm not hopeless for that, and I can understand certain things. I just don't have, I just don't have so much empathy that I'm willing to give away everything that's mine to someone else. Sorry, I'm just not that nice of a person, I guess. I look about other things. I have people to take care of. The wife's high maintenance. I'm just kidding. The wife's not high maintenance. All right, let's see what we got here. Bum, 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 bum. Where am I? Am I looking at the right one? No more usury. Let's see. Bum, bum, bum. Did I go down too far? All right, give me a second here. Yeah, find where I'm at. All right. When Tom mentions his experience and background, I know firsthand. Trust me, and I do what I can, man. I appreciate that. And Jim, thank you for your kind words. Yeah, I've been out there. I've had feet. I've seen some things. I know. I'm like that farm. I know a thing because I've seen a thing. Tom is a farmer. Bum ba dum bum 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 bum. Okay, so anyone with any sense knows these demonstrations are super spreader events. How much will the public health numbers be manipulated? No telling. They might just say they're not out there, and I don't think that's going to be realistic. I mean, they're getting it really bad in Brazil. This isn't done, and honestly, it's probably going to hit just in time for the election. I mean, in a big way. You would think super spreader events would happen faster, but this is going to come back. And I mean, I know a lot of people. It's interesting because I'm actually someone who kind of, if I'm under the standard formula, I lean a little bit right of center, generally speaking, but I treat the virus as incredibly real. So I have a lot of allies who, on that issue, don't think that way. And it's interesting that a lot of people on the right are making the conclusion where the fact that the media has totally abandoned the virus only adds to their argument that this is a hoax. And you can see why it would lead that way, and why the media is leaving the people they supposedly wanted to protect out to dry, I think is a question too few people are asking. All right, let's see. Okay, Civil War means guns. Guns means shooting, right? Absolutely, man. I mean, that's coming. We're fighting low-level breakdown conflict, and it's kind of weird. The system isn't really. People think it's going to be like immediate collapse. We might be living in this weird in-between no man's land where we can still hang out on YouTube and get our scotch, but still have these sort of problems out there. And I don't know what to tell you. Hybrid wars are weird. War is being redefined. But remember, war is nothing more at the end of the day than the ability to impose your will on an enemy. So the first thing we got to figure out is who the hell our enemy is and who's causing these things. Is our enemy ourselves? Is our enemy an external force? What is the enemy? And you're not going to win a battle against an enemy you can't identify. What's it Sun Tzu says? Know yourself, you'll win 100 battles, right? So we got to know ourselves. We got to know who we are. And once we know who we are, then we'll be able to see what isn't us and what's hurting us. But we don't know who we are, so we'll lose 100 battles. And that's how that actually ends up going. The Fed is part of the enemy. I agree with you, S70, but I think, honestly, that the enemy is probably deeper than that, and you probably have an idea to that, too. All right, let's see what we got here. What time do we got here? Imagine Trump bunking with the Joker, Cowboy, Snowball, and Gunny Hartman. That's funny. Duff wings while watching Buffalo burn, man. I feel bad for you. I like Buffalo. I've had some good experiences there. Friendship Bridge, Rainbow Bridge, spent time over in Niagara. And I was a Pittsburgher for 12 years. So I spent a lot of time up there in Buffalo. Good city, good people, solid folk. Beautiful place to go in some ways. Hard city, lost a lot of jobs. But, hopefully the people will bring it together, and I have a lot of faith in what that town can do. And, it's funny, when we were designing the New Albion project, we have, John and I have a mutual friend, actually, who's heavily involved with it, and that was going to be our western border, kind of. We were going to go from New England to the Great Lakes, because Adirondacks in upstate New York is sort of different. So I've always had a very fond opinion of Buffalo. I was a Bills fan as a kid. Jim Kelly. Scott Norwood's a traitor to humanity. People from Buffalo will appreciate why that's funny. Let's see. The banks equal the Fed equals Blackstone equals Fink equals Bolshevik, All right. Random thought. You are well versed in the Grand Inquisitor, and I am from Rochester. It's crazy. Last week, many spots were burglarized. Really sorry to hear that that's happening in upstate New York. Rochester, same thing. I mean, I wish, one of the things I've been thinking about is I've come to think of upstate New York as part of greater New England in my own mental map of things. And I wish we could do more to help you guys. I mean, the problem is your government is facilitating the sort of things that are happening, and I think that is one of the problems that we have seen. And I would say, Cuomo, was showing leadership in fighting the virus, and he was keeping things shut down, and yet people are looking the other way. And honestly, you can't keep doing this. To the people on the left, you can't have two sets of rules. You can't tell one set of people need to be locked down. You want to know why a bunch of people on the right are mad? You shut down churches, but you allow protests. And you can't do that, and it's bad for the protesters, and it's bad for social things. People don't think about the consequences of their actions. You gotta be consistent about things, otherwise people will know your biases, and everyone has biases. Look, I had biases, and I used to have to go talk to people who would tell me things I thought were absolutely abhorrent, but I smiled, I nodded, and if I could do something that was small to help them and it didn't cause problems, I worked on that. And that's the level of leadership you need. You need people who can go beyond their own ideology to help others. And that's why ideology is a cancer. I told you on the show today, ideology is you being lazy. It's you, instead of understanding an issue, saying that, hey, I believe this, I believe that, and that ultimately that's what you're going to follow. And that's not good enough, because we're better than that. And maybe individuals aren't, but your leaders ought to be. I mean, don't you think your smartest people should be your leaders? And but we don't have that. We have people. We have a high school popularity contest for our structural system, and we wonder why we end up with people who aren't up to the challenge. God, I hate democracy. Uh, Anyone who studied history, by the way, feels the same way. It's a false idol, and you know what? I honestly, if I ever write a book on that, I might call it Grilling Up Sacred Cows. Because frankly, that's how I feel about that. There's some things we defend that are indefensible. And I'm not saying you don't need a saying voice. I'm not saying that people shouldn't be considered. I'm not saying people shouldn't be involved. Frankly, I think democracy works brilliantly at the local level. And it's what I argue. People need to be engaged and involved in their community. But at a national level, all it does is turn the whole thing into a bidding contest. And that's disgusting. I hate that. Wide right, New York Giants fan. No, that's terrible. That was the most boring Super Bowl, too. Otis Anderson, 2 yards. Otis Anderson, 3 yards. I give Bill Parcells, and in fact, if I remember right, correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't Bill Belichick at that point still the defensive coordinator in the Giants? You had a hell of a linebacker core. See, I remember the old days where it could be a simple. You had, what was it? You had Lawrence Taylor and Carl Banks. I feel like friggin' Carl the Cuck from Aqua Teen Hunger Force, but I absolutely remember those things. I remember that was devastating, as a kid. Wide right, man. Marv Levy was a class guy. It was funny. I mean, and I feel, that game against Houston, man, that was crazy. But anyways, old stories. You guys don't want me here talking about the 1992 AFC wildcard game. Was it 91? It was 91, wasn't it? But it was the 91 season, but of course it was played in 92. Down 35-3, Frank Reich comes back. Actually, it was the biggest comeback, I think, until what the Patriots did, a bigger one, right? I'd rather hear you sing than talk sport. Well, what do you want to tell you? At W, if it happens, GS, absolutely. Warren Moon was a great guy, actually. Good quarterback. They had some good quarterbacks back then, Warren Moon was a hell of a quarterback. Good guy. Classy guy, as best I could tell. All right. We're not going to talk sports. Tom reminiscing over 1990s football probably isn't interested in anyone, including me. Let's see. Set up Tom's Tavern in Maine. Beers and spirits for the kindred. Would I like to do donation giveaways for signed swag? Dana's coming up with ideas. Breadbox. See, it keeps being referred to as violence, and I don't understand why. By who? Protesters are just holding up and chanting. The looting and rioting is done. 99% of people are peaceful. The reason why, Breadbox, just to answer your question, is that you can't be an Oilers fan and a Titans fan. The Oilers have not forgiven Tennessee for stealing their team. Just go ask someone in Cleveland how they feel about the Baltimore Ravens. They'll burn something. And I get that. That's actually one of the interesting things. Let me mention this as a side effect. The reason why we're given such emphasis to sports in Western culture is it's an outlet for our tribalism. So that we go ahead and feel like we belong to things and we can fight these surrogate battles so we don't fight one another. It's part of your bread and circuses, in case you didn't know that. But anyway, I've seen plenty of examples of bricks being put in places, thrown through windows, lots of places rioted. And like I said, you're right that 90+%, I'm not going to say it's 99%, that might be too generous, but over 90% are peaceful. I have no doubt of it. But nonetheless, the tail wags the dog, and this is what people are going to see. I will tell you what middle-class white America is looking at. They go on Fox News and see a bunch of angry black men destroying their own cities. How do you think psychologically they respond to that? That is how that actually ends up looking. And I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying it's true. But one of the things y'all should have learned from my episode today, it's not, truth is in the eye of the beholder. What you believe is true. You know, Napoleon once said, if I remember, it might have been Napoleon, is that history is a lie commonly agreed upon. That what we do is we all agree on a narrative and we say that's the truth. And if people see a certain thing and it fits a certain view of things, rightly or wrongly, that becomes the truth. You know, there's a lot of things in history that are accepted as truth that are factually wrong. We could go forward. I could do like 20 of them as an example, you know? Like Nero fiddling while Rome burned. The fiddle wasn't invented for another 1,500 years. Nonetheless, it's a story and it's a mythology. It's a fable that's useful. All right, so let's see what else you guys got here. Murray should be able to convince me. Let's see. Kansas is actually E.T. I think that's funny. I'm very sad to hear my daughter, who graduated IU, I assume that's Indiana University, correct me if I'm wrong, graduated last month, far from all of the craziness going on. She has moved so far from the way she was raised. Colleges are a really strange and cynical place in my mind. They're places you pay a lot of money and go into debt to go learn to hate what you think you know. And I know that's a cynical view of things. Look, I mean, all right, Tom's history, right? I grew up in a moderate Blue Dog Democrat family. My dad was a union guy, National Association of Letter Carriers. He was a postman. My mom was a housewife. Not necessarily a happy one, but that's the way it was, and she liked being around the kids, which was us. I mean, I don't know why you'd want to be around me. The only person I've seen in my life who can stand that's my wife, Dana, and, you know, that's proof that she's crazy. Much love for the missus. But ultimately, I grew up in a sort of traditional family in a lot of ways, unionist, sort of protectionist Democrats in a lot of ways. And I went to Swarthmore College, a very left-leaning college, because I identified as a Democrat. And I ran into all forms of socialism and communism and leftist thought, and it sounded good. And it does sound good. Idealism, you know, take care of the people. We're all here in the revolution. But the problem is the damn thing just doesn't work. And I worked a lot of really crappy jobs in my 20s in municipal government. And what I found is that people game the system. If you're focusing a system on distribution and fairness and equity of justice, what you find is everyone tries to figure out how to get their piece of the pie and no one's baking. And that has been part of the problem. That's why I ended up becoming sort of a rightish leaning libertarian. And when I saw that certain groups were more likely to do things than other groups, I ended up becoming a hardcore nationalist. And that's kind of where I've gotten to, except now I'm a Christian universalist, because ultimately I realize all of our morality and ideology is kind of messed up, and that I want to go ahead and be able to reach out to people with an inspiration that we need to make ourselves into something better, or at least strive, because if we can't strive to something better, we will just go ahead and descend to the battle of all against all. So the answer to Leviathan ends up being the Lord, in my way of looking at the world. But even if you aren't a Christian, which is fine, that fundamentally you need an aspirational culture that's trying to gather and develop something, and you can have that in a secular form. I just don't think it works as well. But we don't really aspire to anything. We end up circling the wagons and fighting over who owns what, and that sort of pluralistic war is incredibly corrosive to any society. It happens in late imperial regimes, and it's one of the biggest problems we're dealing with in the United States, but also the West more broadly. But I'm sorry to hear about your daughter, Ricky, and I hope it all works out well. You know, sometimes the real world is a corrective for problems that exist, if in fact that's what ended up happening. Let's see. What was Liberia created for? Yeah, Liberia, it was an experiment that did not go well. I'm very aware of it. The abolitionists bought land in West Africa. A lot of black people got sent there, and the thing failed pretty miserably. Sad story, really. Let's see. You had a career criminal, and it's true, George Floyd being on fentanyl. This conversation, the story about Floyd is going to get worse as it goes forward. It still doesn't excuse what the police did, but it doesn't look good. But who knows? I mean, the plot by the end of this will be China killed him. So we will see. You know, and yeah, no, I mean, Slavs are not privileged people. My family came up. If I go back, and it came up through the meatpacking plants of Chicago. And if you've ever read Upton Sinclair's The Jungle, that's what my family's heritage on my dad's side looks like, a lot like that. Really not a pleasant way to come up. But that's okay. We survived, and we're tough, you know. That's okay. I'm not going to complain. Let's see. Marcus Garvey had a good plan. I'll have to check that out. $3 million per day to Israel. Who cares if what Americans take government aid? We give way too much money to foreign countries. I absolutely agree with that. And I do think the relationship between Israel and the United States is one that deserves greater scrutiny. Let's put it that way. A lot of situations do, actually. We are subservient to a lot of countries and how they're able to purchase the American government like a mercenary chalk, and the American people are led around by relationships, not relationships, false patriotism over that. I think that's a big problem. All welfare is bad, writes Samsung. It is the government picking winners and losers. People that don't really need help can't get it because they don't fit a cookie cutter government rules. No business should get it. You know, it's interesting. I was someone, I guess I could talk about this. I was someone who was really skeptical of UBI, but I actually think giving people a floor is actually not a terrible idea. Because what it can do is it can allow people to transition into being independent entrepreneurs. But I think you have to do some other things to make it all work right. You don't want to have a perpetual underclass living in subsistence who are just sitting there, imbibing stuff like this, not trying to accomplish things. I have my vices, admittedly, but I also try to have my virtues, which is that I work incredibly hard to put together this bizarre show I do. I mean, it was originally a marketing ploy. I was thinking I was going to sell the book that way, and yet the show ended up being the thing. It's like, there's this great series, if you like TV, Halt and Catch Fire. There's this character, Joe McMillan. He's supposed to be like a fake Steve Jobs type character, but he always talks about things being the thing that gets you to the thing. And when I was young, I used to think success in life meant making money because I grew up in a poor family. So what I've learned as I've gotten older is that wealth isn't about money or this. It's about the connections you make to people, how you draw things together, and making purpose and meaning of the time you have in this world. And that you find that if you can be sincere and authentic, you tend to solve the other problems. I know there are plenty of people who fail, and I don't want to sound that idealistic, but honestly, I'm a thrice rebuked, supposed terrible bigot by the New York Times that manages to go out, talk to people, and make things work. So if I can make it work in those adverse circumstances, I have to believe that if you have a dream and you have some purpose, you can probably do the same. And maybe if there is some hope for optimism, is we're still having this conversation, maybe we can get to something really useful and we can actually figure this out. And that is my hope for this. So let's see what else you all have. I hear you, Brian. Mm-hmm. And I answered your question about property tax, Sharon. I'm up to 8:09 p.m. See, I can't keep up with you guys. You're too fast. Let's see. I'm only joining if I'm appointed hockey commissioner. It would be interesting. If you get Quebec, you're going to have a winning hockey team. That's where you really got to get to lock it down. I'd take the Quebec Major Junior League, Rimouski. You got to go ahead and get down. You can beat those people from Ontario. Beat them silly. Turn them. I'm just kidding. I'm just messing with people in here because I know some of the ways that they talk. Ontario and Quebec talk about each other like Oklahoma and Texas. Where is the albino snake? His name is Phoenix, and he's resting. Good memory, John. You pay attention to everything, man. Let's see. When I get worked up, it gets funny. Yeah, I know. I know I'm farcical. Believe me. I know I'm a tempest in a teapot. You don't have to convince me. Can you be a henchman? You can. Absolutely. And I'm going to just, who knows? I mean, I do the stream of consciousness. This is absolutely the way I do this because other people, Dana will come visit, just don't invade. If I'm invading Canada, trust me, it's for a good reason. I wouldn't do it meanly. And besides, I would be so nice to the Canadians. I love the Canadians. I love Fredericton. I love St. John. I even Moncton. If you've ever been to Canada, that's an accomplishment. I actually have a story about time I was hanging out there 2 o'clock at the casino. Let's see. It's misguiding. I view it as people needing better direction that they don't know what they're really mad about. I agree with you, Breadbox. I absolutely agree with you. I love Timmy Hortons, by the way. That's awesome. And having Big Mac sauce on absolutely everything. Actually, you know what I really love about Canada? I love the dark ginger ale, and I love the cheese curds on the poutine that I get up in Saint George. But I can't go across because every time I go across, the damn federal government keeps me for 2 hours, and the pizza's cold by the time I bring it back to Dana, which is a shame. Of course they annoy you because you're in Ontario. I get it. I understand the problem. Which is actually funny because I actually like Quebec and Alberta a lot more than Ontario, but life's ironies, right? And not that the people in Ontario aren't nice. People in Ontario are like, for America, they're like people from Massachusetts. If you've ever met someone from Boston, except they don't have that nasal accent, they have an idea about there's an order or way to do things, and they have this idea of how things should be put together. But it's fine. We are really kindred. We're way more similar than we're different. And I say that as someone who's traveled a little bit, so we'll have to see what happens. All right. Bum, bum, bum. You guys think I need to get bourbon? Who knows? Well, I almost drank vodka. God F for Newfoundland, right? Well, Newfoundland's an island. I would keep the virus out and I keep the problems out. I'm a big fan of islands on maps. You got great fishing, the Grand Banks, right? It's absolutely awesome. Yonge Street in Canada is awesome, by the way. I've been there. Any more news on our relations with China? Just wondering if stuff is going on while we're focused on the protest. Great question, Sarah. Yes, it is. And the ongoing war of words and escalation over trade in Hong Kong continues to escalate. We're going to see what China's doing. Really where I've been hearing about more action is on the China-India front. So we'll have to keep an eye on that. And there's a lot of push and a lot of complaints from multiple countries well outside the U.S. complaining about what information the World Health Organization received from China. So that's where the conflict is at this point. We'll have to absolutely see where that goes. And I saw what you said, Aster. By the way, I didn't have a chance to do that. I hear stories about a lot of things happening that are not hitting the media. Remember, just because you're not hearing about, or just because you're not hearing about, doesn't mean it's not happening. You definitely need to be aware of that. Let's see what we got. There's no Canada like French Canada. I think they take me in Quebec too because I speak French. I know that's one of the things. I might need asylum one day. We'll see. If it goes up there, then I'll be eating poutine and hanging out with my boy Sebas up there and telling how things go badly. I'll just walk across the border. It's not that far. We'll go up with the missus. All right. So, all right, we're gonna talk about Canada. There's no Canada like French Canada. It's a South Park bit, by the way. Can I imagine what an international mistake it would be if no foreigners would be allowed? I don't know. I'd have to hear that in context. I want to understand your question better, Alexa. Can you clarify it a little bit? Let's see. COVID brought into the yellow vest. Indeed, they do. When the Republic fails, it's going to be ugly. States will resolve, and I see enclaves forming like medieval Germany. Great example, man. And I tell you what, my plan was actually to go kind of slow and to build fortress communities that would look like monasteries. But yeah, you're going to see a lot of balkanization. If you've ever played a game of Romance of the Three Kingdoms of Nobunaga's Ambition for the gamers out there, it's going to be a highly divided map. And where are the lines going to go? I kind of want to go back because I used to do it a lot when the virus was hot to talk about where the lines on the map exist between who's going to support what. But the map is now different. It doesn't follow state borders. It follows more where different groups of people are. I did maps like that in the coming Civil War, but I haven't tried to do one since then. I mean, what I used to do, you guys will find this so dorky and autistic, but I literally have done the demography research on the 2,000 counties and all the census districts from Manitoba east. I actually know exactly who lives where, what groups, how you think, how you vote, because that's what I wanted to understand. Geography determines history a lot of times. There was a guy who did a really great history of the Middle Ages. His name was Fernand Braudel, and he actually argued that what happened was the Mediterranean was separate from Northern Europe, and that now we see Europe as one entity because of the fights over the Crusades and the Jihad. But what ended up beforehand was Southern Europe, the Mediterranean was a coherent singular world, and Northern Europe was a singular world different and apart from that, set around the North Sea, Baltic Sea, and the transactions like the old Hanseatic League. So what you end up finding is that the way people draw geography makes a difference, and we now have countries that well transited with geography. I mean, what makes sense in the prairie is different than what makes sense in the mountain, the lowlands, the swamps, wherever you are. What's good for Louisiana isn't necessarily good for New Jersey. I mean, you have to figure out these things, and I think that happy countries often have geography that makes sense to bring a degree of unity in terms of economic policy. It's one of the reasons why America fought the Civil War, actually, because the South was agrarian and they wanted cotton, and the North was industrial and they wanted steel, and the two sets of policies ran into one another. Things they don't tell you, right? I mean, it's basic stuff, but it's important. Well, Johnny, I'm not going to attack you, and I know a lot of people in Canada have different views, so I love them all. I'm not going to say anything mean about any of them. Mm-hmm. All right, where are we? I saw someone mention ketchup chips, but I got to go backwards. All right. All right, I am working to find where I am, because when I go down, it goes back, and I lose. There it is. Don't lose heart. Keep the podcasts and videos coming. I've had overwhelmingly positive response, and admittedly, I was milking it a bit. I'll own that, but it's hard, man. I mean, I don't know. I feel so bad. I mean, you guys tell me, why do you listen? I mean, it's the story I tell you is so depressing. I mean, it depresses me to tell it. It's true. It's honest. And I mean, maybe people choose their red pills lightly, but it's difficult for me to go ahead and tell you things I know are going to make you unhappy, but they do keep you safe. So I guess there's something to it. I just don't know, I don't know. I guess there's a sense of hopelessness. Sometimes I sit here and I think, why are we trying to save any of it? I should just go ahead and I should just focus on my theology or focus on my vices or, go ahead and deal with those things because I'm like, what bothers me most, if I'm really honest, is it's called a Cassandra complex. There's a name for it. When you can see things that are coming down the line in the future and you can't change them, it's really hard for me. I knew in February that this was going to be bungled immensely. And I said what the solutions were, and I saw all the things you could do to make this easier with the virus, all the the 100,000 people plus in the United States, and the many more around the world who could have been saved, and the many millions of jobs and human suffering that could have been prevented. And after a while, when you know there's solutions to problems in the world, and you see that you're attacked for having answers, and you see those solutions won't be enacted, and you see the problems will just continue, you lose faith in you lose faith in humanity. You lose the ability to think this is going to work itself out. And the demoralization is a real thing. Um, Not that I'm not going to fight for myself or for you. I like most of you. In fact, there's no one here I dislike. Let me put it that way. Some of you, you're wrong about certain things, but you feel the same way about me, and that's okay. I can accept that. I can live with that sort of compromise, right? But I wish we could do more, and I feel incredible guilt, to be honest with you, that I don't do more. And I do more than 99% of the people. I know that. Maybe it's because I was the oldest son in my family. My parents were hard on me. Um, but I want to do more, and I want to make a difference, and I want to fix things, and that's the way I am. And I get myself in a lot of trouble, and I do that, and things are said about me because I say things that are true that are very, very politically incorrect, and they're mean and they're insensitive. I don't say it from a cruel position, but I say it because I believe it. If anything I say, I believe. And people always say, "Well, have you changed?" I'm the same guy I was. I'm the same guy I was a year ago, and I'm the same guy I was 5 years ago, except for the fact I've grown a little bit. And people are always like, "Oh, have you reformed?" No, I haven't reformed. I'm just me. I mean, and sometimes I'm honest, and honesty is a small faction because it's hard to be honest, and I'm not honest about everything. I guess. I mean, I lie to myself about certain things. I'm sure. I mean, I'm a sinner. I have problems. We all do. But I try to be honest with my show, and I try to be honest with things, and I try to offer you the best assessment I can. And if I get it wrong, and if I'm a little too paranoid, well, at least you're safe for it, because I'll own that. I mean, I'm not trying to. A lot of times, terrible things don't happen because paranoid people interrupt them. I don't know how else to put it. So sometimes it's useful. And it's always exhausting, though, because it's like I tell Dana, the only reason we moved to New England was to have a quiet life. And the one thing I failed at miserably is doing that. Absolutely miserably. Hmm. Oh, well, let's continue looking at your questions. I'm good trying not to lose heart, Dominic. I appreciate that. And Dana saying she's high maintenance is fake news. Let me tell you something about Dana. That's true. She is a wonderful woman and very supportive, and people have attacked her because of me, and she's stuck by me. So I'm very proud and grateful for my wonderful wife. And I only hope one day she gets a cure for her Lyme disease. So that's absolutely true. It's one thing to help people, but another thing to be used as a resource. Corey says that's true. I agree with that. COVID is taking off in India and Mexico. I got to do more research on the numbers. I'm sorry I haven't been able to do more. I sit at the intersection of a lot of different groups who are very worried about the collapse of America. It makes it a little difficult to get my bandwidth out there, but the good news is that now I have a weekend and I can read PDFs. Who knows? Maybe I'll find some horrible thing to tell you about the virus that at least you would hope would give us the ability to go ahead and come together over that. I mean, I don't know how much scarier this had to be. I mean, realistically, this is the thing that's awful. Is we were dealing with something that could have been an event that would have maybe killed as much as 1 in 10, maybe 1 in 5 people. And people just did not give a damn. And it's a hell of a thing. We were fortunate, and that may or may not hold, but it's crazy to me that people literally approach it that way. I mean, people have such disregard for life. I don't know what you do with that. I mean, people just don't want to be bothered. I don't know. 2 towers, by the way. Mm. You know, Arian, that's a great point. The next war is never like the last war, and one of the biggest mistakes you can make is to try to fight the last war. If you want to watch something sort of interesting that would be helpful to understanding real politics, I watched something. It was talking about, I think it was the 48 Laws of Power. It was an interesting little animated video, and it really presented a realistic view of what happens and how people are manipulated. I think it's really a fascinating story. You really have to understand things in a very interpersonal level. It's really important. I honestly think if you want to understand politics, you're better off playing a game of poker than you are reading Marx or reading Kirk or whoever you like. Edmund Burke, whatever you like. You'll learn a lot more about people that way. I always agree the enemy is the Fed. All right, let's see. And I appreciate your comments, John. So, as an educator and a parent, I feel that we need to go be really responsible for our own children's education. How will that situation affect society? I think that one of the things that I expect to see in the future is there's going to be a choice between technology learning and cooperative learning. I hope parents and educators can come together to create a more immersive education experience. It's not an abstract thing. So many kids go through schools and they're taught the ability to do certain things without an understanding of how it relates to life. Like, take algebra just as an example. A lot of people have an abstract understanding of algebra that's totally disconnected from the engineering from which it's useful. And I think the best teachers manage to relate what they're talking about in real life. I have professors who write me and say, I wish I could give lectures like you give on your show. And all you have to do to be a really effective communicator is relate to the experiences of whatever your audience is, even if they're young children, what you're teaching in a way that has meaning and purpose for them. And so when you look at education, I think that we will see a bifurcation of this. I think that on one hand, there will be a vision that will largely come out of this protest of a sort of view of teaching everyone from one centralized authority to bring people together. And alternatively, I think there will be a more child-centric version that will be highly localized and that will exist as parallel and independent to that system until such point as it's imposed on people. I'm a big fan in homeschooling of collaborative education and non-traditional models like the Montessori model as examples. I'm still mad about wide right. Friggin' if Steve Christie was kicking for the Bills in 1991, there would have been a dynasty. God, I hated the Cowboys. Sorry for the Texas fans. My dad was from Milwaukee. He was like, my dad only cried into two things when I was a kid. He cried when his mom died and when the Packers won the Super Bowl. It's Wisconsin behavior for you. Let's see. I was angry here for the virus in Tennessee, but we are flying high above the riots. I figured as much. There probably wouldn't be much in Nashville or Knoxville. Maybe a little bit in Chattanooga. Chattanooga's a different town, but Memphis. If you were going to have problems, they would be in Memphis, and that would be realistically how it would be. Yeah, I don't know about the economic recovery. The thing about it is, I think I think countries are kind of quietly going onto a wartime footing. The one hint is tariffs are going up all over the place. So you see protectionism is the way of the land right now. So I think we need to keep an eye on that. But I do think we should watch where troop movements are happening. And I would say if you want to see what's happening in a bigger way than maybe you are right now, keep an eye on the military pieces. John might know a couple the websites you want to follow. The Drive is pretty good. Real Clear Military is actually not bad if you want to look at that as an example. Stratfor is actually kind of good with some of their content, though not all of it's free. And you can find different sources out there, and they're out there to be found if you're looking. All right, let's see what else we got here. Hey, I'm not going to take anything from Oilers fans. That fake onside kick was as absolutely a problem. So, Brian, if you're a fan of Aqua Teen Hunger Force, let me just tell you one thing. Tell me if I'm right. Meatwad is a Protestant. Fry Guy, what's his name? Fryman is a Catholic. And Master Shake is Jewish. Tell me if it doesn't fit. I thought a lot about that. That literally, I guarantee you that's what they thought. And if you don't understand. So, I lived through the 1992 LA riots, but this is off the chain. I remember that really being really bad, and it only really went away when Reginald Denny, the trucker, got in trouble. So we'll see what happens. I don't think it's going away, though. Honestly, I don't think there's any reason for it to go away. I mean, and frankly, people are kind of in a position financially where they can keep going forward, so we'll see. The Winter Olympics in 2022 are scheduled for Beijing. So let's see what happens. Wrestling, ECW, Philly Armory. Tom was well-respected ringside antagonizer to the Dudleys, Taz, Bam Bam Bigelow, and Shane. So I've been to the ECW arena. I've been to that shitty little bingo hall in South Philadelphia. John, you know way too much, man. You're going to have to come up here and visit us in Maine. There's no way you're up on ECW. I'm not believing that. That's BS. You've been doing research. So anyway, they're going into rich neighborhoods. There's a lot this time in riding there, and why wouldn't they? I mean, ultimately, if you're going to stand against an unfair system, you should be going after the rich, right? I'm not saying it's good, but that's not surprising. So Floyd pointed an arm at the womb of a pregnant woman. Western civilization has to be destroyed for this guy. Floyd is a pretext. I hate to tell you, but really not for the protest, but for the bigger arguments that are being happened. This is something that's been a fight that's been decades in the making. And the question is, ultimately, Western civilization doesn't like itself. So at the end of the day, how do we remake it? And that's what we're going to have to figure out. And if we don't figure it out, then it's going to collapse. I hate to say it, but we here, I'm playing the role of Jim Leahy in this melodrama, unfortunately. Dana will play Bobandy in all of this. We'll figure out how to solve it, and we'll have to do so because ultimately our leaders have abandoned us. Our leaders, this is the story of Western civilization. You really want to know the ugly truth. The elites decided that they're going to be a class across themselves beyond civilizations, and they're going to fuck over the rest of humanity, whether you're black, white, brown, Asian, whatever the hell you are, it doesn't matter. They have this idea that the rest of us can kind of be left to rot. And the question is, will we figure a way not to fight each other for their benefit and figure a way to rob them instead of them robbing us? And in order to do this, a lot of people are going to go ahead, and there are managers, it's a great point, Throttle Grim, but ultimately they are going to be in a position where they're going to recognize a sort of totalitarian control. The technology may literally lead to a bifurcation of the human species where the rest of us are left behind in a new future. I know that's a big thought, and that's a lot to put out there, but if you start to study transhumanism and you read the right sorts of books that are out there, if you want to see about what they actually think, it's like I'm seeing if I can find the damn book. I mean, there was a book they wrote, and I don't know if I have it here or not, because my books are such a mess right now, and I didn't plan on showing you guys anything. But there's a book called Homo Deus that if you really want to read, how these things would actually work, it kind of shows really intelligently just how tricky it can be how they want to re-rig society. I can't find it, so we're just gonna have to deal with it. And besides, I'm almost at the point where I'm chair-locked. I don't really like drinking this much liquor, but that's fine. We're having a good time. And honestly, I learned from being a political operative, you had to learn how to hold your liquor. And I'll tell you something, if you're actually going to ever play the game, if you think that way, you better be able to handle all sorts of forms of inebriation. Because you're going to be tested, by the way. It's a regular thing. Thank God for Slavic disposition, right? All right, let's see what we got here. United States spent $240 plus million to the Ukraine last week. It was on the ticker at the bottom of the news reports. They didn't even report it vocally. I'm telling you, the biggest news is the stories you never get told. Wolf is about a garage full of toilet paper. That's true, man. Hey, that's what you call rolling freestyle. Stefan Molyneux wrecks the case the cops were wrong. Let's see. Blah, blah, blah. Continuing through. Impossible for the officer to get a fair trial. No, that's true. I mean, whatever Derek Chauvin did, he's guilty in the eyes of the public, man. That guy's going to be sacrificed at the ecumenical cult of political expediency. And that's sad. Let's see. God Emperor of Newfoundland, man. I don't think the Newfies would take me. I like the Newfies, but people tell me they're strange. So, right, let's see. Breadbox writes, I think it's soon, at some point, people not only will not have money to pay for rent, but won't have enough to bring their money to bank up pay for food, unless they send in more dollars. This is going to accelerate. You're right, man. I mean, and that's the truth. They wanted to accelerate. People claim the alt-right was accelerationist. Who would have thought the elites were willing to go ahead and slam their foot on the pedal and say, okay, see if you can survive this. But that's what they've done. This is what accelerationism looks like. And for those of you who aren't familiar, accelerationism is a philosophy that basically says that if society's going to fall apart, make it happen faster so that you can take advantage of how it shakes out. And so it's a philosophy that's been heavily supported by certain groups. Take proprietarians like John Mark or Doolittle. They understand that ultimately things are only going to get worse, so let's deal with problems today. And so what they do is they encourage behaviors that destroy the system. This whole thing, whatever the intentions are, the functional impact is the destruction of the existing system. And if you're okay with that, just recognize, and it might not be the worst of things. It's a question of if you want to deal with short-term pain versus long-term cost. Everyone says, because we want to believe optimistically that you are going to be able to avoid both, that we'll try to figure out a way. But fundamentally, it might not be the worst of ways. We will see. It's absolutely a fair question. Frylock, that's it. Damn it, I can't believe that. Drink water in a beer bottle. Stay sober that way. That's probably smart. I ain't gonna do that. Let's see. Inside the Belt in DC are full of people getting drunk every weekend. I actually do this, to be honest with you. I don't, and Dana will attest to this. She'll back me up. I don't drink other than I'll have a beer when I'm not on the show, but I actually drink because it makes it a little easier for me to share deeper truths that I want to share with you, to try to give you insights in some weird little way. I hope that the phrases and some of the deeper thoughts I share with you will allow you to more effectively not just survive but reach and save other people. So that's my contribution. And it's hard if you're someone who's a bit neurotic and a bit paranoid, and I'll own both of those. That if you want to share with people things that would be useful, you have to kind of trick yourself a little bit and get yourself into altered states of mind. Liquor's one way. There are other ways you can do that. But when you do that, your ability to think of problems differently does actually emerge. And intelligence, if you really understand it properly, is only the ability to network different things. So different substances allow you to do that different ways. And so, what makes you a brilliant analyst is the ability to connect pieces in ways other people can't to end up being factually correct. Things are not as complicated as people assume, but it requires overwhelming honesty with yourself, and that's the thing that I think people fail at. So we will absolutely continue to try to do that. And let's see. No, Frylock has too much good stuff. Definitely a Protestant. Meatwad lives a monastic life like Catholic. Master Shake, definitely a Yid. So I appreciate that. See, the reason I think I knew a lot of Catholics in Pennsylvania who were sort of like very institutionalist, and that's why I defined Frylock that way, as opposed to defining Meatwad. Meatwad to me really seems like he has a simple belief. Like he just looks at the doctrine as what it is and he takes it at face value. But I suspect you and I would define Protestants and Catholics differently, and I really see Meatwad as more of an evangelical. But he lives on faith alone. Thoughts on them taking down monuments like General Lee in Richmond, Virginia, history revisionism? Yeah, I think it's disgusting. I think, honestly, the same stuff we complained about where they were taking down Buddhist statues in, what was it, Afghanistan, that the Taliban was doing, the far left is doing here in America. Look, I get that people don't like the Confederacy, but the story of the Confederacy is different than the story you've read. I would suggest that anyone who wants to take down those statues, you take the time to read some of the writings of General Lee, of, who has good memoirs. What's his name? Longstreet. You would end up look at them and understand the world they looked at it. These were not people who are the pantomime villains they're painted as. And if at the end of that you still feel that way, you want to destroy your own history, you can do so. But that's a key part of the history of the Commonwealth of Virginia and this United States. And if you were looking to judge people by the social justice standards of this time, you're not going to end this until you burn the White House to the ground. I mean, George Washington owned slaves, Thomas Jefferson owned slaves, and I'm not here to exonerate them for that. Look, I'm a Yankee. I get to cast judgments against other people. It's our birthright at this point up here in New England. But fundamentally, I don't think it's helpful. I don't think it makes things better. And I don't think it really understands what the Confederacy was really about. The Confederacy, like any other institution, had its good traits and its bad traits. It represented nobility of people willing to fight for their homelands and for an idea that they would have self-sovereignty. And in fact, in a lot of ways, they had more in common with the American Revolution than the Yankee patriots who fought against them. A lot of the Northerners who fight, and the question that never gets asked about the Civil War, that really should be asked, and I only started to ask about 4 or 5 years ago, and it really gave me a new appreciation for the conflict, was why did Northerners fight? I get why the South wanted to break away. I never understood why the North wanted to, and a lot of them were German and Irish who saw the division between all their individual states, whether it was Ireland between the English and the Irish, or whether it was between the various Protestant and Catholic states in Germany, as well as Austria and France being involved, who said, we don't want that in America. We know it will be bad for the continent. And if you think about it, in the Civil War, if the South had won, the North probably would have allied with Germany, like Harry Turtledove suggested, and we would have had war after war after war on this continent. So whether or not the South was right or wrong, in some ways there were a lot of advantages that emerged from peace being won, and being won in a way that you kept the Union united. And even Lincoln, Lincoln was a tyrant in a lot of ways, but one of the things that he did do was he fought the banks off. And the fact that he had greenbacks that were separate from that is, I suspect, at the heart of why John Wilkes Booth had him killed, and at the heart of why the British and the French wanted to jump into the war. And the North was sort of terrified of Canadian invasion during the middle of this conflict, but they couldn't do it because their own British population wouldn't support the attack on the pro-slave power of which the South was seen, even though economically the English wanted another source of cotton besides what they had coming in from Egypt. So, I mean, like I said, the history of things is more complicated. If you study anything, if you really study things, you realize that there aren't good guys and bad guys. It's just people with motive and purpose, and you need to understand that things are complicated. And even the most heinous of regimes have that. And that, I think if we can have conversations like that, we would end up going somewhere sort of better. But we'll see. But I do think the idea of tearing down General Lee, and I think Robert Lee was a hero in a lot of ways to a lot of people, and even the United States Congress recognized him as such after the fact. I don't think it's helpful. I think it's designed to be provocative and deliberately anger. And I will be honest with you, I think that this is far enough in the realm of ancient history. Robert E. Lee didn't oppress a single black person at this point. That's the reality of it. I mean, I just don't buy into that. And there was plenty of time in the 50s and 60s where, believe it or not, blacks even identified with the Confederacy. Sounds strange. If you look far enough, you can find that. So I don't think it's caught up in those issues. And I understand people find things hurtful and they find things angry and they find narratives upsetting because they paint them in a bad light. But let's put a narrative then when you're in a good light. This is a choice. I mean, we are storytellers. We have an option to develop things how we want to. And let's go ahead and tell a different story. If you want to tell a different story, I am game to tell a different story. Look, I was a kid of the 80s and 90s. We didn't have these fights. I got into identity politics because I was doing it defensively because I wasn't going to be presented as the bad guy. You want to tell a different story, that's fine, but understand you're going to be held to standards into account. If you're willing to play that game, so am I. And let's do that. Otherwise, we could have a fight, and that's fine. I'm a hell of a bastard in the field. Don't, you won't enjoy that. We'll see. And I don't want that. I don't want us to have fights. I don't want us to have issues. And I think about that all the time because we're all getting maneuvered into wars where we may not have a choice. I mean, not for our Canadian friends here. You guys will probably be okay. But other than that, the rest of us are being forced, and we might be forced to take a side where they come and say they conscript you. And that may happen, by the way. That's not crazy if things get really nuts. That's happened in history plenty of times, and you might need to do that for your own survival. Especially, God forbid, you live in the suburbs or the city. Thank God we live in the middle of nowhere. I actually, when I lived in Jackman, I used to make a joke. We didn't live in the middle of nowhere. We lived in the end of nowhere. All right, let's see what. Do I think anything of what's happening is scripture playing out Malibu Maggie? I know the missus does. Well, I don't know. You tell me. Let's go ahead. Let's read scripture for a second, and you tell me if this fits. Give me 1 second. I'll read the relevant scripture too, because I know exactly where it is. I've read this a lot of times, and I will read it, and you tell me if you think it fits. So I'll turn the question in and around on you, and being a good Christian I am here. Let's see. And this is from Revelation 6. This is the key part for what we're experiencing today. I watched as the Lamb opened the first of the seven seals. Then I heard one of the four living creatures say in a voice like thunder, "Come!" I looked, and there before me was a white horse. Its rider held a bow, and he was given a crown, and he rode out as a conqueror, bent on conquest. When the Lamb opened the second seal, I heard the second living creature say, "Come!" Then another horse came out, a fiery red one. Its rider was given power to take peace from the earth and to make people kill each other. To him was given a large sword. Sounds like war to me. When the Lamb opened the third seal, I heard the third living creature say, "Come," and I looked, and there before me was a black horse. Its rider was holding a pair of scales in his hand. Then I heard what sounded like a voice among the four living creatures saying, 2 pounds of wheat for a day's wages, and 6 pounds of barley for a day's wages. And do not damage the oil and wine." And for those who understand the four horsemen of the apocalypse, that was famine. When the Lamb opened the fourth seal, I heard the voice of the fourth living creature say, "Come." I looked, and there before me was a pale horse. Its rider was named Death, and Hades was following close behind him. They were given power over a fourth of the earth to kill by sword, famine, and plague, and by the wild beasts of the earth. So that's what the Bible says. And if you think that fits or not, I will let you decide. But that is the story as it's out there. And I would submit to you that all these things seem to be coming together. And do we live in extraordinary times? Absolutely. What will end up happening? Let's pray. But I will say, eternity's long, life is short, and I always tell you guys to consider balancing those things. I actually often struggle with the question, should I be engaged in this world or should I just be focusing on theology? Theology is my actual love, believe it or not, and that's what I like to focus on. But I had an ecstatic vision years ago where the Lord I perceived to be telling me to go ahead and help people be engaged in this world, and so I honor that obligation because I believe it happened that way. It's interesting being me. I live in a crazy life. Anyway, but hopefully that helps you, Malibu Maggie. I personally, yes, I do think Scripture is playing out. So Joseph writes, they are trying to take the Jefferson Davis statue in Kentucky's capital. We are only the only state to be the birthplace of presidents to two countries. You should be able to defend your heritage, man. Even if people disagree with it, it's still your heritage. You know, you got to own that. I mean, I'm not proud of every mistake I made, but honestly, you know, that's part of what makes you who you are. Yes, tearing down Southern monuments is wrong, writes Breadbox Music. The left needs to pick its battles. That isn't worth it. My biggest personal priority is pushing my left to disappear from social justice warriorism. I will say everyone hates SJWs who isn't one of them. So, I mean, and look, here's the thing about the left. And I say this as a former leftist. The left gets right caring about people, listening to their concerns, and being concerned about big picture issues beyond transactional issues. The problem is they tend to fall for sob stories. If you can solve that, you will do a lot better reaching out into the future. And God, for God's sakes, end cancel culture and brings back a sense of humor. Offensive jokes are funny. You can laugh at them, and it does not just black people like Dave Chappelle who can make them. Once upon a time, people like George Carlin were funny. Let's get back to that world. It was better, right? I would love to see education revised with history through a dual perspective point of view. I think so, absolutely. Let's see. Went to a gun store today, writes Juan. Line wrapped around the building. I was the only person wearing a mask. I'm glad you're wearing a mask, Juan. Good credit to you, man. And I know a lot of people give you crap if you do it. They give me crap too. I freaking look like an Antifa walking around with the damn thing. But it's actually really smart. I'm glad you're doing that. So, and we'll go. I'm going to try to hit 1 hour, 20 minutes. Or excuse me, 120, which is 2 hours. I apologize. And then we'll call it a night. Wave that Bonnie Blue flag. So, for those who aren't familiar with the Bonnie Blue flag, it's a blue flag with a single white star, and it was the flag for the South before they developed the actual flag of the Confederacy. Actually, isn't the flag you think it is. It's a flag with a blue bar on this side with a white circle for the star states are in it, and it has red and white on it. It looks kind of like the Georgia flag. The flag that is generally understood as the Southern flag was actually the battle flag of the Army of Virginia. What was it? The Stars and Bars, as it's commonly known. And it's one of those interesting things that got lost in history that was argued about. But I think I've presented a pretty interesting case. And what we're going to have to do, and what I'm going to do, is I'm going to spend some time trying to figure out what our next steps are. Because we're going to have to do something. I mean, frankly, we have a lot of really smart, talented people here, Americans and Canadians alike. And as well as we have a Londoner, so a good Brit. I'm very proud to have you here, sir. Thank you. We are going to have to figure out how we're going to get out of this mess so we don't see our fellow citizens kill one another. Because we are sitting perched on the edge of a civil war. And trust me, I have written more on the Civil War than pretty much anyone this side of Thomas Chittum. So I have done a lot of research about it, and it's not the right war. If it was the right war, I would support it, and I'm enough of a bastard to admit that, but we're not fighting the right enemy. We should be fighting the people who use financial dominion over us. And until and unless we change that, none of this means anything. All we are doing is destroying ourselves and making other people more powerful. So whatever we disagree about with, even people from Ontario, the most difficult people on the planet in terms of their forthrightness, we will work one together and we will figure out an answer to these problems. And I think that's ultimately what we have to do. So let me do a quick prayer, get your last minute questions in, and then we will go forward here. But yeah, I'm glad you like the Pines and Lines. It's an awesome friggin' flag, and I worked you don't want to know, there were 13 revisions of that flag. But anyways, Heavenly Father, I pray, as always, for the safety and security of everyone who's in this audience, for the wisdom to go ahead and solve these problems, and for your justice to prevail upon us and lead us to safety and sanctuary. Just like you built an ark for Noah that you were there to be for Abraham when his sacrifice was offered, and that you led Moses out of the desert. We pray that you will, through your Son, give us a way to find safety and purpose and find meaning in this world where craziness and wickedness, of division and strife, demons that we know are out there, are working against our interests. So in Jesus' name I pray that, and in for the safety of all of our audience. I think that's really important out there, and I want to share that with each and every one of you. So go through and make sure there's any last things. Lindbergh was, in fact, an incredibly honorable thing, and sad about the kidnapping of his child. I'm glad you mentioned that. I think I didn't see anything else about the Brownian motion one. We'll keep an eye on that. Thank you, everyone, for spending a little bit of time with me tonight. I appreciate it very much. I will be back on Monday. I hope you're having a very good evening. God bless each of you. Please keep safe and be smart. Don't get the virus. Be careful. Wear proper protection, because we still don't know what we don't know, and that hasn't changed. And whatever you believe, I would recommend, whether you lean left or right, be very careful. It's a good time to be scarce. Thank you to each of you who helped going ahead and making this computer repair possible. Do I play chess? Yes, but it is not my favorite game. I'm incredibly aggressive and I suck at the end game. Each of you have a very good night. God bless. I will see you on Monday. I'm trying to exit out of my damn computer because I'm reading the comments there and I got to do it over here. All right, you guys have a good one.